Hey guys, tonight we journey somewhere dim, moss-covered, and just a little bit vegetable-scented. You're trudging up a muddy hill path at dawn, your breath fogging in the cold. The sky's that grim medieval grey that doesn't really change no matter the hour, and in the distance, you hear the dull thwunk of someone splitting firewood with more enthusiasm than accuracy. Ahead, the abbey looms, massive stone walls, lichen-covered arches, and windows so narrow they look like slits for arrows or gossip. This is your new home. For the foreseeable future, anyway. Inside? Discipline. Silence. Incense. And a surprising number of root vegetables. You probably won't survive this. But don't worry, we're just here to visit. Sort of. And to understand how a group of extremely focused monks managed to build a functional, if slightly ridiculous, timekeeping system out of turnips. Yes. Turnips. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your current location and what time it is there. Bonus points if it's dark and you're already tucked in. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The abbey gates creak open and you step inside. The courtyard is silent, save for the crunch of gravel beneath your sandals. You're handed a scratchy robe, rough wool, naturally, dyed with crushed walnut husks and modest intentions. A bell rings. Dull, low, not entirely inspiring. But effective. You've arrived just in time for prime, one of the 8 canonical hours of prayer that will soon run, read, control your entire existence. The monks, most of them older than the furniture, glide past you like ghosts. One of them squints at you, his gaze vaguely accusatory, as if you've arrived late for a meeting you didn't know about. Which you have. But it's fine. Everything's fine. They won't expect much until you've unpacked and proven that you can, in fact, go several days without speaking unnecessarily. You're shown to a narrow cell, stone walls, wooden bench, a single candle stub already melted into a small pool of regret. There's no clock, of course. Just a slot in the wall that might let you guess the sun's mood if you're lucky. Outside, though, now that's where the real action is. In the abbey garden. You walk with Brother Oswin, a man whose eyebrows are longer than your attention span, as he gestures proudly to rows of neatly tilled soil. Cabbages, leeks, carrots, and there they are. The stars of the show. Humble, dusty-skinned turnips. Round, sturdy, non-committal in their aesthetic appeal. You'll get to know them, Oswin murmurs, as if he's introducing you to the Virgin Mary in vegetable form. They help us keep the hours. Now, technically speaking, medieval monasteries relied on a variety of methods to track time: bells, shadows, water clocks. But some, particularly in isolated, agrarian communities with a creative streak, and perhaps a flair for the slightly absurd, turned to what was most available. And in this valley? It wasn't silver. It was tubers. The concept is, surprisingly, not complete nonsense. When hollowed out, dried, and filled with a measured amount of wax and a wick, a turnip can burn like a candle. Sort of. If you squint and have low expectations. The monks discovered that, with consistent preparation, they could approximate the passage of time by observing how long it took the flame to sink through the vegetable flesh. It wasn't exactly accurate, but then, neither was most medieval timekeeping. It just had to get you close enough to the next prayer. Historians still argue whether this was ever officially sanctioned practice or just a rural oddity confined to 3 grumpy monks and a weird winter in the 12th century. But archaeological evidence does suggest vegetable-based timekeeping tools were real, though whether they were treated as sacred instruments or monkish arts and crafts is an open question. Back inside, you're told to wash your hands in cold water that feels personally offended by your existence. Then, lunch. Bread. Some fish if it's a feast day. A stew that probably started cooking when you were still asleep. And another bell, this one higher in pitch, signaling the next canonical hour, terce. You watch as the monks rise in near-perfect unison. How did they know when to stand? You look around. Then you see it. A turnip. Sitting in a shallow iron dish, faintly steaming, a candle melting quietly from its center. The wax drips down into a groove carved in its side, shaped almost like a measuring line. You swear it's marked with tiny numbers scratched in with a pin. You blink. Could it really be? It is. Brother Aldrich, younger than most and clearly the designated Abbey explainer, catches your eye and gives a small nod. Later, he whispers, after glancing both ways, we calibrate it weekly. Based on celestial observation. Moonrise. Wax thickness. Wick type. Turnip age. Weather. Divine mood. You nod slowly, as if this is perfectly rational behavior. Because here it is. Later that evening, during Vespers, the turnip has burned halfway down. A new one is placed beside it for the night's hours. Each monk knows how long each segment should burn. They glance at it as they pray, as they read scripture, as they chant gently into the stone. You watch one monk poke the turnip with a small stick. He frowns. It's burning too fast. Tomorrow, they'll adjust the wax ratio. They treat the turnip like an assistant who's good at their job but frequently drunk. You can't help but admire the ingenuity. In an age before quartz and lithium-ion and wall plugs, people looked at a root vegetable and thought, this will help us commune with God on time. Some abbeys favored water clocks, dripping steadily from one bowl to another, marking time with a near-hypnotic rhythm. Others used sundials, although they were useless at night or on cloudy days, which, in medieval Europe, was roughly always. The turnip had one advantage, you could burn it. And the monks did. Devoutly. Religiously, even. Back in your cell, you sit on your wooden bench and listen to the night settle in. No phones. No alarms. Just the faint scent of turnip wax drifting through the hallway, and the occasional creak of old wood dreaming in its sleep. Outside, a fox screams in the dark. Nature doesn't care what hour it is. But you do. Because if you miss Lords at sunrise, you'll be assigned to clean the privy with a brush carved from hedgehog bristles and shame. The candle in your own room burns low. Not a turnip, but close. Wax made from bee fat, saved over weeks, poured by hand, wicked with linen strips from Brother Hohen's discarded robe. Time passes slowly here. Measured not in seconds, but in prayers and root vegetables. And somewhere down the hall, a monk leans over his turnip clock, squinting to see whether it's time to ring the next bell. It almost is. You wake up with a start. Not because of an alarm clock, those haven't been invented yet, but because a bell somewhere in the distance tolls 6 mournful notes, followed by silence so thick you could butter it onto your breakfast rye. Your cell is still dark, though the tiny slit of a window offers a sliver of silver-grey sky. It's early. The canonical hour of Lords is upon you, whether you like it or not. You dress in the same robe you wore yesterday, because it's the only robe, and shuffle quietly toward the chapel. You pass by the vegetable clock again. A new turnip has been set in its iron dish. Its center glows faintly, a stubby wick fluttering just above the rim. The wax line has barely melted. The day has only begun to burn. Lords, like all monastic hours, is recited in chant. Low, droning tones that echo off the vaulted ceilings and reverberate through your chest like a cat purring inside your ribcage. You try to keep up, but Latin isn't exactly your first language, and you keep confusing domin with domino, which you're pretty sure means pizza in this century. After prayers, breakfast is a modest affair. Porridge, hard bread, and a bit of goat cheese that tastes like it's harboring a secret. As you chew quietly beside Brother Aldrich, he leans in and says with absolutely no irony, "Time is porridge, my friend. Hot when new, thick when left too long." You don't know what that means, but you nod respectfully. Everyone else seems to find it profound. Then comes the work of the day. Your assigned task? Observing the horarium, the monastic schedule, and understanding how the abbey keeps time so precisely with nothing but light, habit, and occasionally flammable root vegetables. Brother Aldrich leads you down to the scriptorium first. Rows of monks, heads bowed, hands in motion, copying ancient texts onto vellum with styluses so precise they could probably scribe a prayer onto a gnat's belly. A small candle glows at each desk, not just for light, but for pace. They're trimmed to a specific height, designed to burn for precisely 1 hour. Ah, Aldrich says, seeing your face light up with premature understanding. You think this is the clock? It is not. The turnip is still master. He gestures toward the corner of the room where, indeed, a turnip sits in a cradle of clay and iron. This one is marked not with hours, but with small etched symbols, crosses, a fish, a bell. Aldrich explains, this one tells us when to switch scribes. Too many hours at the quill and your letters begin to look heretical. Aldrich's right. The monks rotate stations not by minute-hand precision, but by accumulated wisdom, keen observation, and a willingness to trust a vegetable to tell them when it's time to stretch. Outside, the abbey garden is already humming with activity. Brother Oswin is planting cabbage seedlings with the focus of a surgeon and the patience of someone who's decided that talking to plants is probably more effective than talking to people. He waves you over and sets a small basket of turnips at your feet. Selection, he says, is everything. The ideal timekeeping turnip, you learn, is not too young, burns too fast, not too old, too damp, and must be of uniform density throughout. Any blemishes, inconsistencies, or wormholes risk a lopsided melt. You hold one in your hand, heavy, a little waxy, faintly earthy smelling. Its weight feels significant, like it contains not just pulp, but potential. Try to choose one that looks cooperative, Oswin mutters. You're not sure what that means, but you give your turnip a good stare down before placing it in the keeper pile. Back in the abbey's little workshop, a room half filled with wax pots, iron molds, and turnip shavings, you get to observe the sacred rite of preparation. Brother Cedric, who looks like he hasn't blinked since the Crusades, begins slicing off the turnip tops and carving out the centers. The hollow is measured using a tool of wood and string. The wick, a blend of flax and softened reeds, is inserted with all the delicacy of threading a needle underwater during an earthquake. The wax? Beeswax from the abbey's own hives, blended with rendered fat and, wait for it, a few drops of rosemary oil. For even burn and divine fragrance, Cedric mutters, not looking up. You help pour the wax. Carefully. One misstep and you've got a turnip volcano on your hands. Or worse, a premature burn through, which could cause a misfire in the sacred schedule. That happened once, Aldrich explains in a whisper. The evening bell rang too soon and 3 monks skipped supper by accident. There were consequences. Quiet, disappointed consequences. You place your first finished turnip clock into the cooling shelf. Tomorrow, it'll take its place in the great vegetable rotation, marking time like some kind of edible metronome. By mid-morning, it's time for terse. You've started to anticipate the rhythm, 3 hours from prime, just before the workday kicks into full swing. A small crowd has gathered in the chapel, voices low, eyes down. You glance at the turnip clock by the altar. It's nearly burned to the second etching, a small bell with rays. Time to chant. You join in. This time you get most of the Latin right. Mostly. Historians still debate whether vegetable clocks were more than a regional quirk, or if they spread farther than we assume. Some texts from obscure Irish monastic orders mention cendriap, which may refer to a root clock, though scholars can't agree if that's poetic metaphor or a very literal instruction. Either way, the idea that time could be both sacred and seasonal resonated with communities far removed from royal courts and cathedral bells. The bell rings. You step outside, breathe in the crisp air, and look over the garden. The rows of green, the piles of drying roots, the monk with the wheelbarrow full of what look like defective timepieces, turnips split by weather or worm. A cart is headed toward the compost pile. You can't help but smile. Even in failure, time decays into something useful. Later, during dinner, lentil soup and boiled barley, you sit near the novices, who whisper excitedly about the rumor that a visiting monk once brought a parsnip clock. You gasp. Scandalous. Aldrich leans in and says, they burn unevenly. Parsnips are show-offs. Not to be trusted. After dinner, the monks break into short periods of silent reflection. A few read scripture by candlelight, some wander the cloistered garden with their hands folded and eyes distant. You walk, too. Not far. Just enough to stretch your legs and listen to the faint hiss of wind in the hedgerows. Back in the main hall, a bell rings for Compline, the last prayer before night. You glance at the evening turnip again. It's melted nearly 3/4 of the way down. A line of tiny dots scorched into its side has begun to glow faintly. It's almost bedtime. You find yourself weirdly soothed by this strange system. It's not efficient. It's not precise. But it is consistent. Organic. Rhythmic in a way that feels more like breathing than ticking. The turnip burns down at its own pace, and the monks follow suit. You return to your cell. A fresh candle is waiting. You light it, curl up in your scratchy blanket, and stare at the flickering glow on the wall. The flame dances softly. The scent of wax and distant rosemary fills the room. Outside, another turnip keeps time for someone else. Somewhere in the darkness, a monk watches it flicker and prepares to ring the next bell. Your eyes grow heavy. You're woken not by noise, but by smell. Something faintly earthy and smoky snakes into your nose. It's not unpleasant, sort of like roasted squash and beeswax, but it's unfamiliar enough to tug you gently out of sleep. Your candles burn down to a stub, casting an amber pool of light onto the rough-hewn ceiling. And then, faintly, from down the corridor, crackle. Pop. A turnip clock somewhere is doing its job. Or misbehaving. You shuffle into your robe and step into the hallway. Brother Aldrich is already there, arms folded, staring at a turnip in a shallow bowl that has, evidently, split down the middle. The wax has pulled to one side, sending the flame lurching awkwardly to the left like a monk who drank too much communion wine. Ah, Aldrich says, nodding. Cracked. That's on me. Shouldn't have used the soft batch. You murmur something sleepy and vaguely supportive. This is why, he adds, we always keep backups. And sure enough, he produces a second, unburned turnip from a small shelf. It's already been hollowed, wicked, and waxed, clearly part of the Abbey's ever-rotating reserve supply. He lights it with a taper and slides it into place, then scratches a quick note onto a wax tablet nearby, Lord's, minor deviation due to rot. This, apparently, is normal. Back in the chapel, the monks are slowly gathering. You take your spot near the rear, feeling the rhythm of the day settle into your bones like a song you've only just learned the lyrics to. The prayers come. Quiet, chant-like, mesmerizing. You barely notice the sun beginning to rise, painting the window slits with pale blue light. After breakfast, more barley, fewer lentils, you're sent back into the garden, but not to plant this time. Today, you're harvesting. Specifically, you're being trained in how to select a turnip for horological use. Brother Oswin takes this task very seriously. He hands you a knife and gestures to a patch of thick, leafy greens. You want the ones that resist you, he says cryptically. You dig your fingers into the soil and pry up a few specimens. Some are too knobby, others have signs of insect damage. A good timekeeping turnip, you learn, should be roughly the size of a clenched fist, with uniform density and smooth skin. Too small and it burns too fast. Too large and you risk uneven melting. Too irregular, and the flame dances like it's had too much mead. You lift one that feels right. It sits heavy in your palm. Smooth. Balanced. You look to Oswin. He nods. That one's got potential. You beam with what you can only assume is vegetable-based pride. Historians still argue whether any formal criteria existed for this process. Some suggest monks used measuring calipers, others believe it was entirely intuitive, passed down from brother to brother like the recipe for fish stew or which candle to light when your abbot's in a bad mood. Some monastic garden journals, rare, faded, and incredibly dull, mentioned timing turnips by weight, but the units are inconsistent at best. One entry measures a perfect specimen as the heft of an owl's wing. Useful. Back in the Abbey workshop, you clean and prepare your chosen root. Hollowing it is a delicate process, too deep and the flame will pull, too shallow and it won't burn long enough. Brother Cedric watches you closely, muttering occasional corrections under his breath. Wick angle, he grunts, nudging your hand. Vertical. You want the flame to rise, not wander. You adjust. Pour the wax. Let it set. Then, the test, you light it and watch. If the wick is true, it should burn with a quiet, steady flame and begin to melt the wax down the sides evenly, leaving a traceable line behind. Yours? Not bad. The flame flickers, but doesn't stutter. The wax flows slowly into a groove you etched earlier. Acceptable, Cedric says, which, in monastic terms, is high praise. You add it to the rack for later use and mark it with a small wax seal, your initials, a date, and a tiny etched hourglass. This one, you're told, will be used for the hour of sext, 2 days from now. You walk away with soot on your hands and pride in your chest. After lunch, split peas and hard bread, you're sent to the bell tower to observe how the turnip clock's cues are actually used. The monk in charge, Brother Ronan, is huge. Not just tall, but broad and solid, like someone built a cathedral and then put it in a robe. His job is to watch the clocks and strike the bells at the correct moments, guided entirely by wax, flame, and habit. He points to 3 turnips, all burning at different stages. Morning. Midday. Vespers, he says, nodding to each in turn. But how do you know when to ring, you ask? He shrugs. Experience. You watch enough turnips, they start to talk. You decide not to ask what that means. Instead, you sit beside him and observe. Each clock burns slightly differently, but Ronan has clearly memorized the visual language of each one. A slight lean in the flame? That's 15 minutes left. A bubbling pool of wax near the rim? Probably a good time to get the rope ready. At exactly what feels like 1/4 past your sanity, he stands, grabs the bell rope, and gives it a firm pull. Bong. A single toll. No rush. No repetition. Just the sound of time rolling through the valley. You ask him if he's ever been wrong. He nods. Once. Burned a turnip on a feast day that was too old. Melted fast. I rang Vespers an hour early. Whole Abbey ate dinner in stunned silence. We didn't speak of it. Duly noted. The rest of the afternoon passes in quiet labor. You clean tools, wipe wax from shelves, retwist wick bundles. One monk is carving decorative crosses into the sides of a fresh batch of turnips, just for Sundays. They don't burn any better, but they look holier, and that's apparently enough. By evening, your legs are sore and your fingers are stained with a mix of soil and wax. You shuffle to the chapel for vespers, head bowed, voice low. You catch sight of your turnip on the altar, the one you prepared earlier. Its wick is lit. Its wax is melting. And it's keeping time. You smile. Dinner is a quiet affair, lentils again, though someone's been brave enough to add a pinch of mustard seed. You taste it and blink. Flavor? At a monastery? Scandalous. The abbey's main hall is lit by candles and, naturally, several glowing turnips. They line the walls like sleepy little sentinels, each in its dish of clay or iron, flames wobbling gently in the drafty space. You notice something curious, a few have small notches in their skin, like tally marks. You point to one and look at Brother Aldrich. Oh, those, he murmurs around a spoonful of soup. That's Brother Swithin's system. Says he can track the passage of the Psalms as we read them. One notch every 5 minutes. You squint. It's not exactly accurate. The wax is clearly melting faster than his marks anticipate. But he seems proud of it, and nobody's correcting him, so you let it pass. After dinner, the monks file out for Compline, the last service of the day. You linger behind just long enough to see a monk extinguish one of the day's burned down turnips. He gently lifts it with tongs, still warm and soft at the base, and deposits it in a small bucket. Later, you learn, it'll be composted, returned to the garden that raised it. Even time, here, is recycled. Carmpline is dimly lit, the chanting softer than ever, as if the monks themselves are winding down like the flame on the turnip clocks. There's an intimacy to it, shared fatigue, shared reverence. You find yourself following the rhythm of the chants without trying. The Latin is still a blur, but the melody has sunk into your bones. You retire to your cell, brush off your robe, and lie back on the wooden bench. The air smells of damp stone and faint rosemary wax. Outside your door, someone walks past, a single candle cupped in one hand. Time moves slowly here, but it moves. And yet, even in this slow rhythm, things can go wrong. The next morning, you're pulled from your slumber not by the usual bell, but by shouting. Well, shouting by monastic standards. It's more like emphatic whispering with a hint of distress. You throw on your robe and pad barefoot into the hall. A small group of monks are huddled around the chapel's main timekeeping turnip. It's burned through far too quickly, only half the wax remains, but the flame has already reached the base. Aldrich is rubbing his temples. Too much tallow. I told you not to blend yesterday's leftovers with fresh. Brother Cedric, looking mildly offended, mutters something about economy of wax. Regardless, the result is clear, the bell rang early. Lord's was called at least 20 minutes ahead of schedule, sending the kitchen monks into a flurry and one poor novice into a full panic nap halfway through his reading. You glance at the misshapen remains of the turnip. Its interior is scorched unevenly, like a pie left in the oven too long on one side. The wick, rather than centered, had slumped during the night, pulling the flame faster through one wall of the root. The timing system failed, gently but decisively. The monks aren't furious. Just quietly disappointed. Which, honestly, feels worse. By midday, the abbey has recovered. A new turnip burns on the altar. Its wax pool is shallow, even, cooperative. The day's rhythm realigns. But now you've been given a new task, assisting Brother Aldrich in a deeper study of turnip consistency. This means charts. And counting. Aldrich leads you to a corner of the garden storage house where crates of unburned turnips are stacked, each tagged with date, harvest conditions, and vaguely poetic notes like firm with noble attitude. Your job? Weigh each one. Measure circumference. Record firmness on a squishiness scale of 1 to 10. You learn quickly that root vegetables, like people, are rarely consistent. Some burn quick but hot. Some burn slow and uneven. Some smell faintly of cheese, and no one knows why. Aldrich, for all his fastidiousness, admits that even he doesn't fully understand what makes one turnip a timekeeping marvel and another a sputtering mess. It's half science, half mystery, he says. Like faith. Or digestion. He's joking, but only barely. Historians still argue whether such obsessive measurement was common. Some records from 14th century Cistercian monasteries hint at rudimentary experimentation with burn rates and wick lengths, while others mockingly refer to the vegetable hours as a sign of over-precise absurdity. Still, it's clear, some monks took their temporal vegetables very seriously. You spend the afternoon setting up a rudimentary testing rack. 10 turnips, each lit at the same time, each with slightly different wick compositions, flax, hemp, twisted linen, and one rebellious strip of sheep's wool, just to see what happens. The abbey smells faintly like a salad bar that caught fire. You take notes: burn rate, wax flow, flame color, scent. One monk passes by, sniffs the air, and says, "Smells like vespers and regret." By nightfall, the experiment has produced wildly varied results. 2 of the turnips burned beautifully, their wax melting in tidy spirals. One fizzled out after 20 minutes. Another actually exploded slightly, sending a puff of wax onto your tunic. A small price to pay for progress. You store the best burners in a new crate labeled "Reliable, do not eat." Later that evening, you attend Carmpline again, and for the first time, you feel a real connection to the rhythm. You've watched time burn. Measured it. Failed at it. Been scolded by a man with a beet-stained apron and deep feelings about wick length. And now, here in the quiet, beneath the groin-vaulted ceiling and soft candlelight, you feel yourself aligned with it. The turnip burns down steadily on the altar. You can smell the wax, the rooty sweetness, the faint herbal undertone. Your eyelids begin to dip. The chant wraps around you like a blanket. The rhythm continues. Time flows on, one flickering root at a time. You awaken before the bell today. A rare achievement in a place where most residents have their internal clock synchronized to both divine ordinance and smoldering produce. It's quiet, the kind of deep, echoing quiet that only really happens before sunrise in a stone building where even the mice tiptoe. You dress slowly, your robe still faintly scented from yesterday's wax mishap, and slip out into the corridor. The hallway is cool and grey-blue. A single candle flickers near the chapel door. As you pass it, you glance at the altar. The turnip clock there has burned almost to its final marking, a delicate etched line that signifies the approach of Lords. A few final beads of wax tremble near the edge. The flame is steady, confident. It's going to be a good day. And indeed, this morning feels different. After prayers, Brother Aldrich gives you a sly glance and says, "Today, you'll assist in one of our more delicate timing rituals. Something quite fragrant." You're intrigued. He leads you to the kitchen, an airy, smoky hall filled with copper pots, soot-stained chimneys, and the unmistakable scent of something boiling in salt water. Brother Hywin is hunched over a cauldron, muttering. "We're preparing the turnip for sext," he says. You blink. "You mean a turnip?" He shakes his head. "The turnip. The one used for the noon bell." Aldrich explains, once a month, on the Feast of St. Mildred, a local favorite, best known for healing headaches and mildly scolding sheep, the monastery prepares a special turnip for the sext hour. Not just carved and filled, but roasted. "You see," Aldrich says, "we discovered by accident some years ago that when you roast the turnip before hollowing it, the wax burns slightly faster, but the scent, the scent, is extraordinary." He's not wrong. The roasted root now lying on the prep table smells faintly sweet, almost nutty, with a soft caramel undertone. Brother Hywin grins proudly and begins hollowing it with a spoon made from an old bishop's broken staff. You assist with the wax, a blend today of beeswax, sheep tallow, and dried rosemary, and twist a wick from flax and rose stems. "Symbolic," Hywin explains. "Roses for Mildred. This clock will burn for exactly 1 hour and 5 minutes. Or so you hope." Back in the chapel, the air slowly fills with its scent. As it burns, the sweet smell wafts through the rafters, giving the entire midday prayer a strangely festive aura. Some of the monks close their eyes, deeply inhaling. One quietly mumbles, "Smells like Lent never happened." The monks might be quiet, but their noses have long memories. After sext, you and Aldrich go walking along the cloister walkways. The stone is worn smooth from centuries of soft sandals. "There are," he says, "more ways to keep time than just candles and bells. Some monks rely on their own bodies." You raise an eyebrow. "No, not like that," he adds hastily. "Though there is a story." And he tells you of Brother Ambrosius, long past, who swore he could feel the hours in his knees. He would rise just before the bell every time, and no one could explain it. We called him the monastic barometer. You ask if anyone else has such a talent now. Aldrich shrugs. Brother Ronan insists his stomach knows precisely when it's prime, but I suspect he's just always hungry. Back in the garden, Brother Oswin is experimenting again. This time? Timekeeping with carrots. Yes. Carrots. They burn faster, he says, setting one into a metal cup and lighting the wick, but they give off a lovely orange glow. You both watch. The carrot crackles. It does glow faintly orange. But within 5 minutes the wax boils over and extinguishes the flame. Back to turnips, he mutters, unsurprised. Historians still argue whether any monastery officially experimented with alternative vegetables, or if these stories are simply the product of long winters and too much dew. Some suggest that coastal abbeys may have tried driftwood-timed candles or seaweed hourglasses, though, frankly, that sounds suspiciously poetic. But when it came to sturdy, consistent, root-based timekeeping, Turnips won by sheer perseverance. The afternoon brings a task that feels less divine and more bureaucratic, documenting wax inventory. You're handed a ledger, quill, and a key to the wax room. Inside, the air is warm and slightly sticky. Shells groan under the weight of wax blocks in every hue from pale yellow to deep golden brown. Some are labeled by origin, local hive, gift from Bishop Turald, wax of uncertain providence. That last crate is only used for practice clocks and experimental wicks. You count, tally, weigh, and begin to see how much effort it takes to keep time burning. Wax is precious. It takes weeks to collect, strain, and render. Bees are fussy. Their keepers even fussier. Brother Cedric pops his head in. You'll want to record how many blocks were scratched by the cat. You frown. The cat. He nods. She likes the smell. Thinks it's cheese. You find 3 poor scratched lumps, note them with appropriate dignity, clawed but usable, and carry on. Later, after Vespers, you're given a chance to inspect the abbey's wax molds, wooden carvings used to shape the turnip-filling wax before it's poured. One mold is ancient, darkened with time, and etched with a small sun. Summer hour, Aldrich explains. Burns longer. Another is marked with tiny icicles. Winter. Compact. More fat, less beeswax. This seasonal strategy allows monks to adjust burn times to ambient temperature. In colder months, wicks shrink and wax thickens. A turnip that burned an hour in spring might last only 40 minutes in winter. The monks adapt. You try pouring a winter blend into one of the carved molds. The wax moves slowly, like molasses, but it sets with satisfying firmness. Later, this will be inserted into a turnip pre-hollowed for the colder months, a snugger cavity, a shorter wick. Everything is calibrated. Everything tuned. And still, things go wrong. Brother Ronan bursts into the workshop near sunset, panting. Emergency, he says, the bell for none didn't ring. Aldrich blinks. Why not? Ronan shrugs. I was waiting for the signal. The turnip never flickered. Everyone turns to look at the offending root. Sure enough, it's sitting in its dish. Intact. Unburned. Unlit. Someone, no one knows who, forgot to light it. There's a long pause. Then, gentle laughter. It's not scolding. Just understanding. Even a monastery with root-based clocks can miss fire if the first spark never happens. That night, during Carmpline, the turnip burns beautifully. No one says anything, but the unlit one still sits on a nearby shelf, unburned, unrepentant. A gentle reminder that even the best systems are only as reliable as the person who strikes the first match. You go to bed full of roasted turnip scent, wax on your hands, and one lingering truth in your mind. Time, like faith, burns best when tended carefully. The abbey is quiet again. You're starting to realize that quiet isn't the absence of sound here, it's the sound of the place. The creak of beams in the wind. The faint splash of water in the cloister fountain. The whisper of sandals on stone. And, ever so faintly, the steady burn of wax. You rise early again, this time not from duty but from curiosity. Aldrich told you last night, today you'll be working in the firelit workshop, a space that sounds romantic in theory but smells like scorched flax and regret in practice. You're excited anyway. This is where the real craftsmanship of turnip time happens. The quiet magic. The geometry of devotion. The workshop is tucked behind the apothecary room, past shelves stacked with dried herbs, bundles of lavender, jars of unknown powders, and one alarming basket labeled rat skulls, blessed and unblessed, mixed. You don't ask. The workshop glows like a lantern. Even in daylight, the thick stone walls keep it dim and cozy. A long bench runs along the window, cluttered with carving tools, wick spindles, and curls of dried root peelings. Wax pots bubble gently over a slow fire. Hanging from wooden beams are racks of completed clocks, turnips hollowed, filled, and ready, tagged with names like Feast of St. Anselm, Evensong, Crisp Air, and Do Not Use, Burned Sideways Last Time. Brother Cedric, your guide for the day, is already at work. His carving grooves into the inside of a turnip shell, thin channels along which melted wax will trickle, marking time as it flows. You want it to run slow, he mutters, but not lazy. A clock should work like a monk, steadily, silently, and without catching fire. You nod solemnly. The firepot behind him lets out a soft blorp. You begin by selecting a turnip from the prime candidate's crate. Cedric watches you with a squint. That one's got good symmetry. No lumps. Good. Won't lean while it burns. He hands you a tool, a curved scoop shaped from antler, and you begin the hollowing process. It's strangely meditative. The scent of the raw turnip is earthy, clean, slightly peppery. As you work, you realize just how delicate the operation is. One wrong scoop, and the sides become too thin. The wax will leak. The flame will gutter. Time will fizzle. You manage a near-perfect hollow. Next, the wick. You've already learned the basics, but today's lesson is advanced, wick braiding. Cedric teaches you the 3-strand twist, flax, linen, and a single strand of horsehair. Gives it backbone, he says. Horsehair's got fortitude. You're not entirely sure what that means, but the resulting wick is firm and even. You insert it into the center, then anchor it with a dollop of warm wax. As it cools, Cedric begins to tell you the story of the turnip of St. Gerontius. Legend, well, local legend has it that one monk, centuries ago, crafted a turnip clock so perfect that it burned for 12 full hours without faltering. Supposedly, it marked the passing of Gerontius's final day with divine accuracy. The flame died exactly as he drew his last breath. Historians, of course, Cedric adds, say it probably just went out during a nap. Still, they keep a relic of it, what remains of the blackened root, stored in a little chest near the chapel. No one lights it anymore. It's half crumbled and smells vaguely like pickled despair. By midday, your wax blend is ready, beeswax mixed with tallow and just a touch of lavender. It's for tonight's Carmpline hour, a calming scent. You pour slowly, steady-handed now. The wax flows into the turnip like thick gold. You center the wick with a stick, then leave it to cool on the rack. In the corner of the workshop, you notice a pile of rejects, turnips that cracked, burned too fast, or smelled strangely of fish when lit. Cedric says they repurpose them for wax tests or, occasionally, stew. Once the wax is out, of course. You blink. You eat them. Well, not often. But sometimes. Waste not. You don't ask further. As the afternoon sun slants in through the slit windows, you find yourself alone in the workshop, monitoring burn tests. 10 turnips line the bench, each marked with a number, each burning quietly. You note how long it takes the flame to reach the second wax groove. Some arrive in 20 minutes. Others, 35. One rogue specimen crackles aggressively, then goes out with a wet sigh. That one is labeled possessed. Retest. While the wax melts and the wicks burn, you start to notice little rhythms. The way the flame leans when wax is uneven. The sound a turnip makes when the cavity is too wide, more of a pop than a hiss. You start to understand the personality of each clock. Historians still debate whether this level of individual attention was typical or simply the obsession of particular abbeys. Some manuscripts describe sacred vigilia, where monks took shifts observing candles and noting divine patterns in their burn. Others suggest most monks didn't care as long as the bell rang roughly on time and the soup was hot. The truth is probably somewhere in between. By the time Vespers rolls around, you're gently coated in wax, soot, and pride. You've made your first solo timekeeping turnip, and it's going to mark Carmpline tonight. Aldrich meets you in the chapel just before prayers begin. You lit it. You nod. Wick trimmed. Perfectly. Blessed with a humble heart. Mostly. He smiles. Good enough. The flame dances steadily. The lavender scent is subtle, just enough to soothe the senses. As the monks chant, you watch the wax descend along the groove you carved. The flame reflects off the stone walls. Time, once again, is burning in the palm of a root. And then, a sound. Bing. Not a bell, but a small iron chime dangling near the turnip dish. The wax has hit a tiny plate embedded in the groove, a new invention. When enough wax collects, it tips the plate, strikes a chime, and lets the monk know it's time. Cedric must have installed it while you weren't looking. You smile. A sleepy little invention. Soft, unobtrusive, just enough to nudge someone toward the next prayer. Nothing loud. Nothing urgent. After prayers, the monks quietly file past your turnip. A few nod. One gently pats you on the shoulder. Back in your cell, you lie on your bench and listen. Outside, the wind murmurs against the walls. A single wax drip hits the stone with a quiet tick. And somewhere, in the stillness, time continues to burn. Sext begins with a smell. Not incense, not bread, but a gentle waft of something that smells suspiciously like scorched vegetables and pine needles. You open your eyes to find your cell faintly misted with the aroma. It's not unpleasant, it's just peculiar. You rise and step into the hallway. Several monks are already up and moving toward the chapel, faces neutral, but noses slightly twitching. Brother Aldrich, waiting near the altar with a smirk, gestures toward the newest invention, the scented turnip. They said it couldn't be done, he says. And honestly, they might have been right. Turns out, this morning's timekeeper was infused not only with wax and wick but also a bit of powdered resin and crushed pine bark, someone's experimental blend, intended to signal the hour by aroma. You have to admit, it works. You're up. Smells like Advent and boiled socks, Brother Cedric mutters on his way past. Still, no one seems displeased. It's a novel take on a very old tradition. And in the monastery, where the schedule rarely changes, a little olfactory surprise is sometimes as thrilling as a meteor storm. Today's focus is the midday bell, the sext hour, roughly around noon, and one of the most important parts of the monastic rhythm. It's where prayer meets digestion, and where the turnip clock must burn with the greatest precision, lest the kitchen monk suffer unjust blame for premature or delayed lunch. You're tasked with monitoring the timing turnip for this holy duty. It's been specially prepared, wax triple filtered for clarity, wick trimmed with monastic scissors that may or may not have been blessed, and the turnip shell itself hollowed by Brother Oswin, who insists he can feel the balance in his fingertips. You watch it burn in the chapel. The light is golden and steady. The wax melts slowly, curling down the carved channel like honey over a spoon. Each drop lands in a tiny depression, a makeshift time bowl, meant to signal the halfway point. The monks chant. Time passes. And then, the scent changes. The pine fades. A hint of something warm, faintly buttery, emerges. You realize someone added time to the wax. This wasn't in the plan. Brother Aldrich leans in, sniffing. Kitchen monks, he whispers. Testing seasonings via clock. Again. You raise an eyebrow. He nods. Last week it was sage. Almost triggered a false vespers. The idea that timing devices double as seasoning samplers is both hilarious and oddly practical. With so many herbs growing around the abbey, and so many hours to fill, it makes a strange kind of sense. Historians still debate the practicality of such practices. Some medieval kitchen records do mention time tinctures, where herbs were burned for culinary judgment. Was it really part of timekeeping? Or just bored monks making soup with flair? No one knows. But you suspect, strongly, that it was both. After sext, lunch is served. Barley again, this time with lentils and a few shredded greens. It's not exciting, but it's warm, and the herb blend matches the turnip scent suspiciously well. Coincidence? Probably not. You spend the early afternoon in the garden with Brother Oswin, who's begun sketching a new timekeeping idea in the dirt using a turnip as a stylus. See here, he says, poking a diagram, we plant turnips in a spiral. Each bulb lights one after the next. Chain reaction. Time becomes a journey. You blink. Like a vegetable sundial. No, he says. Better. A root dial. He's serious. You humor him. Together, you help plant a test spiral, 12 carefully spaced holes, each containing a shallow cup of wax and a turnip shell fitted with a tapered wick. If it works, the idea is that the flame from one burned-down clock will ignite the next, in sequence. Time walks forward, Oswin says. Like a gentle parade. You light the first one before Vespers. It burns as expected, but you'll have to wait through the evening to know if it successfully passes the fire along. Back in the Abbey, Brother Cedric has gathered a group of novices in the fire room for a wick-trimming seminar. You sit in, partly out of curiosity, partly for the warmth. He holds up 2 wicks, identical to the untrained eye, and says, one will burn gently. The other will sputter and set your entire Vespers on fire. The novices look alarmed. You already know the difference, it's in the tightness of the braid and the angle of the twist. Too tight, and the wax can't travel. Too loose, and the flame flutters. There's an art to it, just like anything else here. You watch as each novice tries their hand. Some twist too fast. Some forget to anchor the base. One drops his wick into the wax pot and sighs. Breathe, Cedric advises. Monks don't rush. We observe. Then we burn things. You take a wick and demonstrate the technique you've learned, flax in one hand, linen in the other, gentle pressure. Twist. Breathe. Repeat. Cedric nods. Adequate. High praise. As Vespers approaches, you return to the chapel. The turnip clock is lit, glowing faintly like a little root-shaped moon. The aroma of time has faded now, replaced by the familiar clean burn of beeswax and focus. The monks file in, robes rustling, voices low. The chanting begins. And just as the service reaches its midpoint, crackle. The turnip fizzles. A sudden gust from a cracked window snuffs the flame. Gasps ripple down the pews. You're up instantly. A small taper rests near the altar, emergency flame. You relight the wick quickly, shielding it with your hand. The clock flares, steadies. The monks nod and continue as if nothing happened. Later, Brother Aldrich pats your shoulder. Quick response. You've got good instincts. You shrug. I like my hours on time. He laughs softly. Still, he adds, we'll have to check that batch. Might have dried too fast. After prayers, you and Oswin return to the garden to check the spiral. Miraculously, 3 turnips in, the chain has worked. One root burned down and tipped its flame onto the next. Then again. But the 4th turnip? A dud. The wax pooled instead of lighting. Oswin stares at it. Still, he says, a partial parade is better than none. You nod. Back in your cell, you prepare your personal candle for the night. A small, palm-sized root you've hollowed yourself. Just enough wax for a soft glow and a whisper of clove. You light it, lie back, and breathe. The abbey is still. The clock turnips burn. The spiral sleeps in the garden. Time moves, gently. You're awakened by a sound you've come to recognize intimately now, the soft hiss of melting wax, followed by a brief, spirited pop as a trapped air bubble escapes the bottom of a burning turnip. You crack one eye open. Outside your cell, the faint glow of candlelight flickers is dim, golden, alive. It's not a harsh light, but it gently announces that matins, the early pre-dawn prayers, are near. You sit up slowly, limbs heavy, mind still swimming in the warmth of dreams that smelled faintly like rosemary and lentils. Today, Brother Aldrich has promised you a special task, recalibrating the abbey's clocks using moonlight. This is not, as you might expect, some medieval astrological ceremony involving crystal spheres and dancing under the stars, though, frankly, that wouldn't be entirely out of place here. No, this is more mundane, but just as mystical in its own way. You arrive in the chapel to find Aldrich crouched beside the largest of the abbey's timekeeping turnips. It's already burned halfway down the night before, and he's marking where the wax pool reached using a tiny sliver of coal. Accuracy, he says, is a dance with nature. Time doesn't care about rules. It cares about rhythm. You nod like you understand. Tonight, he says, we calibrate by the moon. Full phase. Wax reflects on wax. A mirror of time. Poetic, you think. And also vaguely confusing. But you're in. The monastic schedule depends heavily on approximate intervals between services, some hours longer in summer, shorter in winter. Timekeeping must adapt to the seasons. But while the sun rules the day, the moon rules these fragile pre-dawn hours. And for monks committed to both devotion and practical routines, the moon serves as a backup chronometer. You follow Aldrich outside, where the garden is bathed in cool, silver light. Frost glimmers faintly on the soil. Turnips, those noble timekeepers, sit partially buried in rows like quiet little monks of their own. Tonight's mission is to match the burn rate of your current clocks with the moon's position. The abbey has a small observation platform, not an observatory, just a low stone perch tucked above the eastern wall. From here, the monks watch the moon and estimate the passage of time using its arc across the sky and the shadows it casts. Here, Aldrich says, handing you a wooden card carved with slits. Moonslit reader. Put it to your eye. You do. The moon glows in the frame. As it shifts from slit to slit over the hours, you track its speed. You check the wax. You check the burn. You adjust your expectations. Historians still debate how much formal lunar timekeeping was used outside of Islamic and Chinese traditions, where astronomical observation was highly advanced. In Christian Europe, most lunar records were kept for calendars and Easter calculations. But rural monasteries? They adapted the heavens into their routine however they could. And in this abbey, that meant moon-calibrated turnips. Back inside, you return to the workshop. Brother Cedric is already experimenting with a new design, double-wicked turnips. You see, he grumbles, poking a root with two slightly crooked flames dancing atop it. If one goes out, the other carries on. Like twin monks. You nod, watching as one wick sputters while the other continues steadily. The wax flow is odd, heavier in the middle, lighter on the sides, but the concept has merit. The problem, he says, is the scent. Double wick, double smoke. Smells like an overworked dinner. Indeed, the air carries a hint of burnt parsnip and despair. Still, you help him pour a few more test clocks. The second one burned surprisingly clean. Maybe there's something to it. After breakfast, porridge and a surprisingly optimistic apple slice, you head to the bell tower for your shift. Brother Ronan has offered to show you how to read the lean. Turnip flames, he explains, never stand perfectly upright. Their lean tells you everything. A leftward lean with a steady base? 20 minutes left. A flickering lean to the right? Wicks thinning. Better start the bell pull. He demonstrates with a thick wax marker, drawing exaggerated diagrams in a soot streaked notebook. You can't help but smile. There's science in his madness. You begin watching the flame like a weather vane. As the turnip burns, you notice that it leans just slightly forward, toward the window. Draft, you ask. Ronan nods. Wind from the cloister walk. Happens when the kitchen monks open the side vent. He adjusts the turnip dish slightly. The flame rights itself. Another lesson? Clocks are not static here. They respond to the space, the season, the whims of breezes and shadows. No wonder they're treated like co-workers. You begin referring to yours, half-jokingly, as Brother Crispin. After sext, you return to the garden for a different kind of study. Brother Oswin has a theory: the color of a turnip affects its timing. I've noticed, he says, that pale turnips, almost white, burn faster than the purple-capped ones. You harvest 3 specimens, clean them, and hollow each identically. You mix identical wax. Trim identical wicks. And then, you burn them. White burns first. Purple second. The darker, denser turnip? Slowest. You and Oswin scribble notes on scraps of parchment, trying to explain it. Density? Skin thickness? Divine preference? Historians will never believe this, you mutter. Oswin grins. That's why we don't write all of it down. That night, Carmpline is especially beautiful. The moon is high. The burn matches the shadow. The bell rings precisely as the last wax pool touches the dish edge. The scent is lavender and old parchment. The flames dance, but do not falter. As you lie in bed, eyes heavy, you picture the moonlit garden. The rows of sleeping turnips. The scent of time lingering in the hall. The soft, steady lean of time passing by root and wax. Tomorrow, it might all burn a little differently. And that's okay. Because here, you don't chase time. You grow it. It begins with a fizzle. Just as you're slipping your sandals on for the prime hour prayers, a thin wisp of smoke snakes through the hallway. It carries with it an unmistakable scent, overburned wax and singed root. Not the usual soft, herbal perfume of the abbey clocks, this is sharper, like someone tried to cook dinner on a bonfire made of compost. By the time you reach the chapel, a small circle of monks has formed around the timekeeping altar. The turnip clock has collapsed in on itself, its sides melted unevenly, its wick twisted like a corkscrew. The wax has overflowed its dish and soaked into the linen cloth beneath. Not dangerous, but undignified. Brother Aldrich pinches the bridge of his nose. The humidity, he sighs. Always the humidity. Today, you're told, you'll be learning how to correct for vegetable misfires when the clocks misbehave due to unpredictable elements. It's more common than you'd think. This one? A soggy turnip. Picked too early, not dried long enough, and stored near the washing buckets. You poke the remains with a stick. It squishes. We'll have to recalibrate, Aldrich mutters. So begins the sacred work of clocks gone wrong. In the workshop, a table has already been set. 3 questionable turnips sit beside a set of brass measuring calipers, a beeswax stick, and a very serious-looking jar labeled Crisis Wick No. 4. Cedric explains, sometimes, even your best-prepared turnips will burn unpredictably. Maybe the wax is too soft. Maybe the wick absorbed moisture. Maybe the turnip, like many living things, simply woke up in a bad mood. Your job now is triage. First, identify the cause. You examine yesterday's culprit. Its interior is spongy, holding more water than it should. Brother Oswin joins you and offers a grim diagnosis. Early frost before harvest. The sugars swell. You get uneven combustion. Second, repair if possible. In theory, you could dry the turnip more, cover new cavity, and rebalance it with a firmer wick. But it's unlikely to hold shape. Retire it, Cedric says, poking it with a tiny fork. Let it become soup. And so it goes into the bin. Not all clocks survive. Still, the monks aren't discouraged. These setbacks are part of the process. The abbey's timekeeping isn't meant to be flawless, it's meant to be faithful. Consistent in effort, not perfection. You're assigned to assist in preparing replacements for the rest of the day's hours. Starting with terse, a short, mid-morning prayer that demands a turnip with a 30-minute burn and a strong vertical wick. You carefully select a root from the dried and blessed crate. It feels solid, balanced. You carve, wick, and pour wax, adding just a hint of chamomile for the scent. The result is clean and elegant. Brother Cedric nods in approval. This one might actually behave. It does. The terse hour passes smoothly. The monks chant. The time melts in measured silence. The flame leans slightly, obediently, like a monk bowing in prayer. But just when you start feeling confident again, none arrives, and with it, another misfire. This time, the flame gutters after only 10 minutes. A sharp pop, then smoke. The wick has drowned in wax. You examine the remains. Turns out someone, possibly yourself, poured the wax too deep, covering part of the wick. Not enough exposure. Not enough breath for the flame. Brother Aldrich watches silently. You look up. He shrugs. Failure's a tutor with a very clear voice. You fix it. Trim the wick. Reset the cavity. Pour again. This time, more carefully. The next attempt burns well. Steady. Strong. It lives. By mid-afternoon, you're helping organize a full turnip audit. Cedric's created a checklist. Firmness, poke-tested. Skin, unblemished. Aroma, neutral or faintly herbal. Wick base, seated properly. Wax mix, batch-labeled and consistent. You and 2 novices begin sorting a crate of 50 roots. Some pass. Some fail. One contains a very small slug. Unfit for timing, you write solemnly on its label, before releasing the slug into the compost with quiet dignity. Historians still argue about the frequency of failure in these analog systems. Medieval records rarely include daily mistakes, focusing instead on holy feasts, births, deaths, and miracles. But some minor journals, kept by overly meticulous monks or slightly bored scribes, offer insight into the day-to-day challenges of keeping time with materials that rot. One letter from a 13th-century Bavarian abbey reads, "We lost the hour of sex to root rot and must now reflect deeply on our storage." The same abbey reportedly switched to sand-filled glass bulbs the following winter. Heresy? Perhaps. Efficiency? Definitely. Back in the garden, you check the spiral chain experiment you helped plant 2 days ago. To your delight, it worked. Almost. 6 of the turnips ignited one after the next, their flames creeping through wicks twisted into slight arches that touch their neighbors. But number 7 refused to catch. Its wick was soaked by dew, likely condensed from a cold snap the night before. You nod to Oswin, who strokes his beard thoughtfully. Perhaps we enclose them, he suggests. Little wax domes. Like chapel roofs. Weatherproof. You consider it. You'll try that tomorrow. Evening comes. Vespers approaches. You prepare the main clock, a modest, medium-sized root with a classic shape. A monk's turnip. Reliable. Grounded. Nothing fancy. As you light the wick and place it on the altar dish, you can't help but smile. Despite the day's chaos, the rhythm has returned. The monks file in. The flame glows. The chanting begins. And for the next 40 minutes, the world is nothing but song and wax, time and silence. Back in your cell, you light a personal taper, fashioned from leftover wax and a shard of the morning's failed wick. Even broken clocks can be useful. You drift to sleep with the scent of chamomile still clinging to the air. Tomorrow, there will be more time to fix. This morning's breakfast comes with a side of suspense. You're barely halfway through your usual hunk of bread and bowl of lukewarm lentil mush when Brother Oswin slides onto the bench beside you and whispers, "We're trying a water clock today." You blink. A water clock? He nods, eyes gleaming with the kind of excitement normally reserved for feast days and rare cheese. "It's only for backup," he says. "The turnips have been moody." You can't argue with that. Yesterday's root-based schedule went sideways twice, once from humidity, once from someone confusing lavender wax with lamp oil. That particular clock had to be retired mid-burn and buried in the garden, just to be safe. Still, the idea of using water instead of wax intrigues you. By mid-morning, you're standing in the cloister garden with Oswin and a small group of very curious monks, all peering at a barrel-like contraption made of aged oak staves bound in iron. A spigot protrudes from its base. Beneath it, a clay bowl. "We fill it," Oswin explains, and time how long it takes to drip out exactly 1 hour's worth. Brother Cedric snorts. And if it freezes? Then we're praying in silence and guessing the Psalms, Oswin replies dryly. The experiment begins. You pour carefully filtered rainwater into the barrel while Cedric scratches timing notes onto a slate. The first few drips are enthusiastic, but then the flow stabilizes, plip, plop, plip, soft, steady, almost meditative. You all fall silent, listening. The idea is to see whether the bowl is full exactly when the sext bell should ring. Meanwhile, your faithful turnip clock, carved and filled the night before, burns beside it, ready to provide a cross-reference. This, you're told, is the real monastery science, parallel clocks. For 30 minutes, you monitor both. The turnip's wax melts evenly, its flame clean and upright. The water flows. You measure with a stick, the bowl is rising. Everything looks, shockingly, on track. Then a bee lands in the water. You all freeze. The bee swims once in a loop, seems to reconsider its life choices, and then flutters away, trailing a small wake. Cedric frowns. Contamination. Start again. You sigh, dump the bowl, and refill. Round 2 begins, and you settle in to observe. The monks take turns guessing which will win, the vegetable flame or the fluid drip. One novice starts a tally sheet labeled Turnip versus Water, Dawn Smack Down. Historians, of course, are divided on the usefulness of water clocks in Europe. Known as clepsydry, they date back to ancient Egypt and Greece, but their popularity in medieval Christian monasticism is debated. Some abbeys used them as nighttime aids when sunlight and shadows failed. Others rejected them, citing unpredictability, leakage, or, as Oswin puts it, they're wet. Your abbey's verdict? Water clocks are charming, but messy. And slow to reset. Still, it's not a wasted experiment. You've seen firsthand that the route isn't the only path to temporal truth. There's a certain beauty in options. After sext, you're called into the scriptorium, not to copy texts, but to inspect something. Brother Ludo, the illuminator, has been drawing diagrams of timekeeping devices for the Abbey's Liber Temporum, a sort of illustrated manual for future monks. And there, on the parchment, you see it, a turnip, painted with almost tender precision. Cross-sectioned, labeled in Latin, with miniature monks drawn beside it for scale. It's adorable. Needed a visual, Ludo says, squinting. They say a picture's worth 1,000 prayers. You point to a small symbol beside the root, a sun with a grumpy face. That's for high burn days, he says. When the air is hot and time moves too fast. You help him ink the wax path inside the root, a faint spiral with notes like melting zone, crisis bubble, and do not blow on flame. The scriptorium is warm with candlelight and quiet hums of focus. You find yourself oddly relaxed, copying little notations onto a scroll while the turnip clock in the corner burns gently. By the time you leave, the diagram is nearly done, and you're now officially part of timekeeping manuscript history. Evening approaches. You're tasked with preparing a new blend of wax for Carmpline. Tonight's mix? Beeswax, with a hint of frankincense. It's an indulgence, used rarely, reserved for nights when reflection is especially needed. You pour the blend carefully. The smell is intoxicating, rich, smoky, ancient. The kind of scent that makes you feel like you're walking into the Book of Psalms. You fit the wick, trim it just so, and set the root into its dish with reverence. Later, when the monks file in and the flame catches, you watch it flicker like a heartbeat. The scent rises. The chants begin. And just for a moment, the air seems timeless. 1 hour. 1 turnip. 1 ritual, quietly perfect. And then, just as Carmpline ends, there's a thump from outside. Someone forgot to secure the garden gate. The sheep have escaped. You rush into the cloister with half the abbey, slippers slapping against cold stone. A dozen woolly forms lope across the vegetable beds, bleating with what feels like targeted glee. One stops beside the turnip spiral and nibbles at the final, unburned root. Oswin lets out a gasp like he's just watched a relic defilement. That's next week's Vespers. Chaos reigns for about 7 minutes. Then the sheep are herded back, the fence is relatched, and the surviving turnips are assessed. 3 are bitten. 1 is gone entirely. Brother Cedric holds it together admirably. We'll replant. Eventually. Back in your cell, you light your own small taper, a modest wax blend with a scent of sage and humility. It burns a little unevenly, but it burns. That's enough. Time keeps passing. Even when the sheep intervene. You wake up to the sound of soft clinking, metal on metal. A rhythmic, deliberate tap, tap, tap. You sit up slowly, blanket tangled around your legs, and glance toward your tiny window. It's not quite dawn. The sky is still the color of old parchment, tinged at the edge with the faintest brush of gold. The clinking continues. You step out into the hall, robe dragging, and follow the sound to the kitchen courtyard. There, huddled over a brazier, is Brother Hywin, the monastery's de facto culinary monk, stirring a massive pot of something that smells vaguely spicy. Next to him, neatly arranged on a wooden table, are a dozen roasted turnips. Not your usual wax-hollowed timekeepers, these are stuffed. You can smell herbs, steam, maybe even butter. He sees your wide-eyed look and nods. Ah, you're just in time. Today's Sabbath. That means slow-roasted timekeeping. You blink. Wait, are the clocks? He grins. Not just clocks. Feast clocks. It's a tradition you haven't heard about until now. On Sabbaths and certain saintly feast days, the abbey doesn't just measure time with burning turnips, they flavor time. They eat it, too. The process is as follows: 1 special turnip is selected for each canonical hour. It's cleaned, roasted lightly, then hollowed and filled with a pre-measured wax blend, but instead of simple beeswax, the mix includes herbs, spices, and sometimes even a drop or 2 of wine. When burned, the scent fills the abbey with rich, savory aromas, each tied to the spirit of the day. Then, when the hour passes, the half-burnt remains are returned to the kitchen, scooped clean of wax, and turned into that day's dinner. You've heard of soul food? Hywin says. This is time food. You help him carry the sexton Vesper's turnips to the chapel kitchen door. The sexed one is already giving off notes of rosemary and bay leaf, with a faint trace of smoked garlic. It smells, unironically, heavenly. At prime, the monks gather as usual. The candle is lit with ceremony. The scent spreads slowly, a kind of warm perfume you feel behind your eyes. Even the chant seems a little deeper today, as though the psalms are marinating. After prayers, Hywin pulls the clock from its dish and rushes it back to the brazier, where it is promptly sliced, stirred, and folded into a thick root vegetable stew. It's practical, of course, but it's also poetic. The food you smell becomes the food you eat. Time, literally consumed. You ask Aldrich if this is a widely practiced ritual. He shrugs. Some abbeys burn incense. Others ring fancy bells. We roast the clock and put it in soup. Historians still debate the intersection between sacred ritual and culinary practice in medieval monastic life. While there are records of food-related blessings and seasonal fasting rhythms, the idea of using timekeepers as ingredients is rarely documented. One obscure 14th-century cookbook from northern France mentions turnips à l'heure, but scholars disagree whether this referred to literal timekeeping or simply a stew that took an hour to cook. Either way, your monastery has made it an art form. After terce, Brother Oswin leads you into the garden, where preparations are underway for the planting of next season's crop of horological vegetables. Feast turnips grow better when blessed early, he explains, sprinkling ash over the soil. You help turn the beds, fingers chilled but heart oddly warm. There's something grounding about returning the very things that once marked time into the earth that will grow the next cycle. Today's Sabbath also brings visiting friars, 3 monks from a coastal priory, here for a scroll exchange and mutual complaint session. They're older, sun-leathered, and they walk like they're used to steep hills. One of them, Brother Theophilus, sniffs the air as he enters the chapel. Is that time? You nod. In the sext clock. He chuckles. We used to try that. Once lit a cabbage by accident. You exchange methods, notes, and a few scandalized looks when you mention the turnip spiral garden. We measure time by tides, says another friar, Brother Ulrich. But I'll admit, your soup smells better. The visitors stay through Vespers. They join the prayers. They eat the stew made from the earlier roasted turnips. They admit, begrudgingly, that the rosemary wax leaves a surprisingly complex aftertaste. By nightfall, as Compline approaches, the chapel is warm and dim. The final feast clock is burning, giving off a deep, mellow scent of nutmeg and honey. It fills your lungs as the monks chant the closing psalms of the day. The flame flickers gently. The wax sinks slowly. And then, silence. The hour ends. The meal is ready. Tonight, the remains are mixed into a simple barley porridge, just enough to hint at sweetness. Brother Cedric proclaims it edible with moments of insight. You eat in the candlelight, feeling strangely satisfied. Not just full, but complete. After dinner, you help scrape out the wax residue from the clock roots and set the shells aside. They'll be composted, maybe, or turned into small bowls for salves and soap. Nothing is wasted here. Not even time. You walk back to your cell beneath a quiet sky. The stars are clear. A fox calls in the distance. Somewhere in the garden, a sheep grunts suspiciously near the spiral patch. You light your small candle, tonight scented with bay leaf and pine. A nod to today's culinary theme. It glows softly, steady and warm. You lie back, hands folded, full of soup, spices, and a strange affection for the way time can be tasted. You wonder, just before sleep, what tomorrow's turnip might smell like. It starts with a knock. Not on your cell door, that would be far too direct for a monk. No, it's a gentle rapping on the windowsill, followed by the unmistakable shuffling sound of someone trying not to wake you while still clearly needing your attention. You open the wooden shutter. Outside, in the misty grey of pre-dawn, stands Brother Edric, cloak wrapped tightly, holding what looks like a soggy sack. Message from the travelling friars, he whispers. They left us something. From the east. He hands you the sack. Inside, 2 small turnips, slightly longer than the ones your abbey grows, with a smoother, more oval shape, and a tiny scroll tucked inside a waxed pouch. You unroll it carefully. The handwriting is looping and precise. These roots are from the friary at Dunfold by sea. Grown in salted air. Excellent for morning hours. Smell faintly of kelp. Do not roast unless you enjoy regret. You chuckle. Kelp-scented turnips? Sounds like a challenge. Later that morning, you present them to Brother Cedric and Aldrich in the workshop. Cedric pokes one. Too smooth. Suspicious. Aldrich sniffs. Smells like low tide. Still, in the spirit of experimentation, you hollow one and prepare it for prime. You use your standard blend of beeswax and tallow, with a fresh flax wick. No added herbs, no tampering, just the root itself. As it burns, the scent is unmistakably oceanic. Not bad, just briny. It reminds you of distant piers, windblown robes, and overly curious gulls. Brother Oswin passes by, takes one whiff, and says, smells like a saint drowned. Despite the comments, the clock performs beautifully. A full hour with a slow, even melt and a straight flame. You note it carefully in your record. Dunfold variety, excellent vertical burn. Scent polarizing. Not recommended near meal prep areas. After prime, you visit the cloister library with Brother Aldrich. He's been working on a scroll of regional timekeeping variants, an effort to record all known methods used by other monastic communities. You assist him in adding the Dunfold root, sketching a little diagram of its distinct shape. Aldrich notes its salt tolerance and suggests a possible seaweed-infused wax for future trials. While you're copying, he tells you stories. One friary outside Barcelona tried olives, he says. Hollowed them, filled them with scented wax. But too oily. Caught fire. 2 prayer benches lost. You wince. Another in the Carpathians used small gourds, he continues. Held more wax. But smelled like wet rope when extinguished. Historians still debate whether these alternate timekeeping methods were practical or simply local curiosities. Some records suggest that turnips were more common in northern climates due to their hardiness, while southern regions preferred clay oil lamps or sand-filled hourglasses. But one thing seems clear: monastic creativity had no borders. Back in the workshop, Cedric is testing a new idea. Turnip clocks with carved vents. Let the wax breathe, he explains. Fewer blowouts. More drama. His etched delicate grooves around the rim of the root, like tiny windows. As the wax melts, steam and scent escape more gracefully. You light one and observe. It burns slowly, the fragrance unfurling like incense. Lavender and ashwood. It's lovely. You decide to carve one yourself. It takes time, steady hands, careful strokes, but when you finish, the vented turnip looks like a tiny cathedral. You light it just before terce. The flame glows through the slits, flickering like stained glass made of root. Brother Ludo wanders in, sees it, and gasps. That belongs in the manuscript. You're famous now. Temporarily. After midday prayers, you accompany Brother Oswin to the root room, a vaulted cellar beneath the garden shed where harvested timekeeping turnips are stored to dry and age. The air is cool and earthy, with a scent like dusted parchment and damp pine. Dozens of turnips hang in linen slings, each labeled with date and destiny: Lords, Matins, Vespers, small batch, experimental, do not blame me if it explodes. Oswin checks each one for softness, inspecting skin and stem, marking his parchment with comments like firm and promising, bitter eyes, and this one seems angry. You help rotate the slings, making sure the roots dry evenly. You're beginning to see them less as vegetables and more like companions. Each has its role, its quirks, its place in the sacred rhythm. Later, you assist Brother Hawin in preparing a gentle carmpline clock. This one is to be burned in memory of a monk who passed 5 winters ago, Brother Mellitus, a man remembered for soft humming and a fondness for honey in everything. In his honor, the wax blend includes beeswax, thyme, and a single drop of honey. It smells faintly sweet, almost floral. You light it with care. It flares, then settles into a soft glow. Carmpline is quiet tonight. The monks chant low, voices like the hum of distant hives. As the prayers echo through the stone, the honey turnip burns gently on the altar, releasing its scent like a slow blessing. Afterward, Brother Cedric finds you in the cloister. You've done well, he says. Most novices take weeks to carve evenly. You try not to beam. I had a good teacher. He nods. And good roots. Never underestimate a cooperative vegetable. Back in your cell, you find a surprise on your bench, a small, slightly crooked turnip with a wick already set and a note. For your personal hour. From the root room. Burn gently. You light it. The scent is mild, clove and earth. The flame leans slightly left. You adjust the dish. It straightens. You lie back, stare at the flickering glow, and think of done-fold turnips, time you can taste, and clocks that sometimes hum. Somewhere, below ground, a cellar full of vegetables waits its turn to keep time. And the abbey, flawed, fragrant, faithful, ticks on. You wake to the sound of bells, but not just any bells. These are brighter, more layered, almost musical in their pattern. Not the usual low, single-tone bell of prime or vespers. This is something else. Something festive. You swing your legs off the bench and shuffle into the hallway, where the air is buzzing with a soft energy you haven't felt before. Monks are moving more quickly than usual, still quiet, still reverent, but with that unmistakable hurry of people trying not to hurry. Today, you learn, is a feast day. Specifically, the Feast of St. Batildis, a local abbey patroness best remembered for founding a convent, predicting a flood, and once, allegedly, calming an entire room by raising her hand and whispering, "Everyone, hush." It's almost sexed. She's deeply beloved here, mostly for that last story. Feast days upend everything. The monastic schedule remains, of course, the canonical hours still ring, the prayers still echo, but the turnip clocks today must reflect the significance of the occasion. Not just accurate. Not just useful. They must be glorious. Brother Aldrich meets you in the workshop with sleeves rolled and eyes sparkling. It's the feast, he says, and that means the ceremonial clock is yours to prepare. You blink. Me. He nods. You've earned it. Besides, Brother Cedric's still upset about last year's coriander incident. You don't ask. The ceremonial clock is no ordinary vegetable. It sits, waiting, in a special chest carved with vines and tiny crosses. It's larger than the usual timekeeping roots, closer to a melon than a turnip, but still technically in the family. It was grown in the farthest bed of the garden, in soil blessed during last year's equinox service. It has a name, apparently, Huris gloriosum. No pressure. You begin by inspecting its shape, nearly perfect. Smooth skin. Deep purple cap with pale gold ridges. You tap it with your knuckles. It rings faintly. Good density. Brother Oswin appears with a small bundle of herbs, marjoram, bay, and a pinch of saffron, a rare luxury, donated, you're told, by a traveling bishop with poor time sense but excellent taste. You mix the wax blend slowly, stirring over a low flame until it shimmers like amber. The wick is braided with 3 strands, flax, linen, and a thin thread of gold leaf, hammered so fine it moves in your breath. It doesn't affect the burn, but the symbolism matters. You hollow the root with your best tools. The cavity must be even, the wool smooth. You etch tiny channels for wax flow, using a stylus shaped like a miniature bishop's staff. Once it's ready, you pour the wax with trembling care, and when it sets, you insert the wick and seal it with a carved wax seal, a tiny bell surrounded by vines. It's beautiful. You stare at it for a long moment, unsure whether to light it or place it in a reliquary. But time waits for no root. The monks gather early for terce, the chosen hour for the ceremonial clock. The chapel is warmer than usual, hung with extra linens and clean to a glow. Someone scattered dried petals near the altar, probably Brother Ludo, who takes aesthetic liberties when left unsupervised. You place the clock on the altar. A hush falls over the room. Brother Aldrich steps forward, lights the wick, and steps back. The flame catches. It burns golden. Strong. Steady. The scent that rises is subtle but rich, spice, warmth, a faint sweetness. A few monks close their eyes. One smiles. Another whispers, "That smells like a cathedral that just baked bread." The hour passes in reverent silence. The wax melts perfectly, slowly, forming a spiral pool around the wick's base. No smoke. No flicker. Just a quiet glow, as if the saint herself were standing nearby, smiling in approval. You feel your heart swell, just a little. After prayers, the clock is carried, not extinguished, to the refectory, where it's placed at the center of the table during the feast meal. Yes, there is a feast meal, rye bread with honey, soft cheese, mulled root stew, and, in a moment that feels almost sinful, 2 kinds of preserved fruit. Even Brother Cedric takes a second helping. After the meal, the ceremonial turnip is allowed to burn down naturally, until the wick gives one final flicker and falls into silence. Then it's placed in the ash niche, a small stone recess in the chapel wall reserved for honored roots. Oswin pats your back. You did well. She kept time. And smelled like devotion. Later in the afternoon, the monks gather in the cloister for a relaxed reading hour. No formal labor today. You sit beneath the archways, watching the shadows stretch slowly across the paving stones, and listen to Brother Ronan recite a humorous tale about St. Julian mistaking a sundial for a serving platter. The mood is light. Even the sheep, carefully locked away after last week's raid, bleat with a certain serenity. Just before Vespers, you help Brother Ludo illustrate a new page in the Liber Tempora. It's your ceremonial clock, drawn from memory, with exaggerated gold flames and tiny birds fluttering around it. He insists on adding a halo. It was blessed by behavior, he says, inking a faint circle above the flame. That night, Calmpline returns things to calm. The final clock of the day is a humble one, small, soft-scented, made from a leftover root that didn't make the morning cut. And yet, it burns just as faithfully, its wick whispering in the quiet as the monks chant. You sit in the back, candle in hand, feeling a strange kind of joy. You've watched time burn today. Watched it flicker, scent the air, measure something bigger than itself. Back in your cell, you light your own small clock. Tonight it's rosemary and cedar. A grounding blend. The flame bends slightly, then rights itself. You lie back, staring at the ceiling, thinking of saffron-scented hours and saints with good timing. And outside, in the chapel niche, a hollowed root rests in silence. It has done its duty. The morning after the feast day feels like a hangover, though no wine was involved, just too much honey, too much incense, and a rather intense game of guess the herb over Vesper stew. The abbey has quieted again. The monks move a little slower. The birds aren't singing so much as whispering. You wake to the usual sound of dripping wax and shuffling robes, but something's different. There's tension in the air. Brother Cedric passes your cell with a sigh so deep it might have been mistaken for a Gregorian drone. You follow him toward the cloister garden and spot a familiar circle of monks gathered in the shade near the herb beds. They are not planting. They're arguing. Well, monk arguing. Which is mostly low, slightly pointed Latin with long pauses and a lot of narrowed eyes. Brother Aldrich sees you and waves you over. Ah, good. You should hear this. You approach just in time to catch Brother Oswin muttering, "It's divine timing. The turnip is a vessel of grace." To which Brother Ronan replies, "It's a damp vegetable. It rots like any other thing." Aldrich leans in and explains, "We're having a cloister-level disagreement about whether the turnip clock is an act of devotion or just a convenient accident." You nod slowly. You're debating the theology of root vegetables. He sighs. Yes. Again. This isn't the first time, apparently. Once every few seasons, the abbey re-enters this philosophical tug-of-war. Is the turnip clock sacred? Or simply useful? The room is divided. Brother Cedric believes in functional devotion, that anything, used in the service of prayer, becomes sacred through consistency and intention. He gestures to a smouldering turnip from yesterday's cycle. That, he says, is no less holy than a relic, if it helps you pray. Brother Oswin disagrees. No. Holiness is not about function. It's about purpose. If a vegetable helps us pray, fine, but let's not canonize it. Brother Ludo, ever the scribe, suggests a compromise. We write a hymn. Not to the turnip, but to the concept of timing. This is somehow worse. Historians still argue whether monks in early medieval Europe truly treated their tools, candles, sundials, and yes, vegetables, as spiritual objects. Some records suggest certain timekeeping devices were blessed, even buried with monks as tokens of their discipline. Others view these as exaggerated gestures, rooted more in routine than theology. You suggest taking the question to the abbey's abbot. There's a collective groan. He'll say all time belongs to God, Cedric mutters, and then assign us to separate corners to copy psalms until someone repents. Still, the debate simmers all day. During sext, Brother Ronan deliberately uses an unblessed turnip just to prove a point. It burns perfectly. But Cedric whispers, "Yes, but did it inspire you?" You visit the scriptorium during none and find Brother Ludo sketching what looks like a saint, holding a glowing turnip. "That's Saint Radegund," he says. "I've taken liberties." You're not sure whether to nod or stage an intervention. Back in the workshop, you try to distract yourself by testing a new wick variant, one braided with dog rose fiber. It smells faintly floral and burns steady, but sputters a little near the bottom. Still usable. You make a note, good for spring festivals. Not debates. Evening arrives, And with it, Vespers. You've prepared tonight's clock carefully, a medium route with standard wax and no unusual symbolism. You just want peace. The monks file in quietly. The flame is lit. The prayers begin. And halfway through the chanting, the power of ritual kicks in again. You watch the wax melt, soft and steady. The scent is familiar. The flame dances as if pleased with itself. No miracles. No heresies. Just the passage of time. Afterwards, you find yourself alone in the cloister with Brother Aldrich. He's staring at the garden. They're both right, of course, he says. A turnip is just a turnip, until we trust it to mark the sacred. Then, even its failures mean something. You nod. I once used a candle that burned too fast, he continues. Melted through in 30 minutes. I panicked. Prayed faster. Made it in time. Felt like a miracle. You glance toward the chapel. Maybe that's what makes it sacred, you say. That it doesn't have to work, but we believe in it anyway. He smiles. That's faith. Or poor engineering. Sometimes both. That night, you prepare your own clock, a humble little root with a flicker of lavender wax and a short, practical wick. Nothing fancy. It burns slow. Steady. Without agenda. You lie down, wrapped in the rhythm of a day full of low-level theological unrest, and listen to the clock. Outside, the monks have stopped arguing. The flame leans left. You adjust the dish. Time returns to balance. It begins, as many disasters do, with sheep. Specifically, one sheep. Her name is presumably something like Woolberta or Saint Beatrice, but she answers to nothing and fears no man, monk, or fence. You're in the garden just after Lord's, helping Brother Oswin gently inspect the new batch of sprouting turnip seedlings, when she reappears. The woolly menace. She's somehow breached the fencing again, perhaps through a monk-sized gap someone forgot to relatch after hauling compost, and now stands smack in the center of the spiral garden. Chewing. On a freshly planted horological seedling. Oswin stares in horror. She's eating next week's clocks. You sprint toward her with the agility of someone who's just witnessed time being swallowed. She looks up, nonchalant, then darts off with the grace of a four-legged linen thief, trailing a bit of waxed string in her wake. It takes 3 monks, a blanket, and half a bowl of yesterday's barley porridge to wrangle her back into the pen. Oswin double-checks the gate himself this time, muttering things in Latin that are probably not allowed during Lent. Once the immediate crisis is over, you both examine the damage. The outer edge of the spiral, gone. A handful of seedlings trampled. 2 others clearly chomped. The rest? Shaken, but recoverable. You kneel beside one, pressing the soil back around its base. We might have to replant. Oswin sighs. Time waits for no you. You both chuckle, albeit tiredly. The monastery takes the loss with good humor. Mostly. Brother Cedric marks the incident on the wax tablet in the workshop, turnip casualties, sheep induced. 3 lost. 1 heroic recovery. Refencing required. The phrase becomes the joke of the week. Still, with half the spiral compromised, your turnip-based timekeeping faces logistical strain. The Abbey had just barely begun testing a schedule based on burning 1 root every 2 hours in perfect progression, the flame cycle, as Brother Ludo optimistically named it. But now? Gaps in the spiral. Fewer available roots. Slight panic. Aldrich convenes an emergency rhythm council, which is exactly as serious as it sounds. 5 monks huddle in the cloister with wax charts, parchment, and a bowl of roasted parsnips to keep them going. You attend, partly out of curiosity and partly because your name was on the compost rotation and you're trying to dodge it. The debate centers on how to adjust the schedule without disrupting prayers. Brother Ronan suggests doubling the burn time of existing turnips. Cedric frowns. That risks scent fatigue. Last time we did that, the entire chapel smelled like melted salad. Oswin proposes substituting wax-only vessels, simple candles in plain clay dishes, for 2 of the affected hours. Not ideal, but better than nothing. Eventually, a compromise is reached. The spiral will be reseeded, and in the meantime, the abbey will revert to its old system of multi-wick load-bearer turnips, those longer-burning roots designed to span 2 hours or more. The monks adjust quickly. That evening, you help prepare a batch of these workhorse timekeepers, wider turnips with double wicks and deeper cavities. You blend a wax mix that includes rosemary and mint, chosen not for speed, but to soothe the nose during the longer exposure. During Vespers, one such root takes center stage. You light it with a long taper and watch as both wicks bloom at once, like twin suns rising from the soil. The scent is subtle, herbal, refreshing. And it holds. 2 hours, exactly. You and Aldrich stay up watching it just to be sure. The next morning, you're called to help in the replanting ceremony, a minor monastic ritual involving quiet prayers, turned soil, and the whispering of psalm fragments over each seed. You kneel beside Oswin in the rebuilt spiral garden. He presses the first seed into the earth. Every clock starts with this, he says. A tiny piece of silence, buried in patience. You mimic his actions. Plant. Cover. Bless. Repeat. Each turnip, a promise of time yet to be measured. Historians still argue whether these replanting rituals were standard or eccentric. Some abbeys may have treated them purely agriculturally. Others, like yours, imbued them with symbolic meaning, renewal, faith, the cycle of devotion. One German record describes monks singing a full choral hymn while planting their timekeepers. Another simply reads, turnips sown. Cold. Fingers stiff. Morale fair. After planting, you return to the workshop and help label the salvaged clocks, mid-cycle reserves, sheep survivors, and flame twins. There's something almost affectionate in the naming. Brother Ludo begins sketching a new page for the Liber Temporum featuring a defiant sheep stomping across a spiral of burning turnips. You try to dissuade him. He adds a halo. The day passes calmly. The patched rhythm holds. But as night falls, you notice something unusual during Carmpline. The evening's clock, a regular single wick, burns more quickly than expected. Too quickly. The wax shrinks visibly with every breath. The flame dances erratically, as if chased by some invisible breeze. Brother Cedric frowns. Humidity's dropped. You nod. Dry air. Better draft. It's a subtle change. Natural. Seasonal. But it throws the timing off by almost 10 minutes. The monks chant a little faster to catch up. Back in the workshop, you adjust tomorrow's wax blend, slightly thicker, more tallow-heavy, to account for the drier conditions. Everything shifts. Everything adapts. Even the roots. Before bed, you visit the spiral garden. The moon is high, the soil dark and wet, glinting in the silver light. You see tiny shoots beginning to rise already. Green tips breaking the surface like the first strokes of a pen on parchment. You light a small personal turnip clock and set it in the soil beside them. Just for a moment. It glows. Time watching over its own future. You retrieve the root, now warm, and carry it back to your cell. Tonight, you burn it quietly beside your bench. Its wick curls to the right. You adjust the dish. It steadies. Outside, the sheep are sleeping. Time marches on. Carefully fenced. It's the middle of the night, and you're awake, not for prayers, not for sheep, but because of an odd sound, a gentle scratch from somewhere beneath the floorboards. At first you think it might be a mouse. Or, worse, Brother Cedric trying to invent a new kind of wick trimmer. But no. It's softer. Rhythmic. Almost like quill on parchment. You grab your candle, wrap yourself in your robe, and follow the sound through the dark corridors until it leads you to a narrow, low-ceilinged stairwell you've never noticed before. A wedge of light spills from a barely cracked wooden door. You push it open slowly. There, hunched over a narrow desk, sits a figure swaddled in a thick hooded robe. A candle flickers beside them. On the desk, open manuscripts, small pots of ink, a half-eaten apple, and, to your amazement, rows and rows of miniature painted turnips. You found the illuminator. Brother Morris, as he introduces himself in a voice like sand and honey, has served in quiet anonymity for decades. Most of the monks believe he retired years ago. Technically, he did. But no one told him to stop illuminating. He gestures to a stack of carefully bound books, copies of the Liber Temporum, including annotations, historical theories, and yes, turnip diagrams. They asked me to stop adding faces to the clocks, he whispers conspiratorially. But I can't help it. I like when they smile. You flip through one page and indeed, a cheerful purple root smiles from beneath a delicate halo, its wick burning like a crown. Brother Morris chuckles. I draw them as I remember them. Each one had its personality. You ask how he knows. He leans in. Because I lit them. For years. Before Brother Aldrich. Before the spiral garden. Back when we used clay bowls and wax lumps and, once, a potato. You pause. A potato? He nods solemnly. It burned sideways. We don't talk about it. Over the next hour, you learn more from Morris than you've heard from a dozen scheduled lessons. He shows you old wick designs, including one wrapped around a feather quill, and a failed attempt at a singing turnip that whistled faintly as it melted. Sounded like a goose in distress, he admits. He has charts. Observations. Notes written in a mix of Latin, Old English, and affectionate doodles. One entire scroll is dedicated to wax bloom, the mysterious tendency for some roots to develop a tiny wax flower as they burn. Miracle, he shrugs. Or just draft patterns. Historians still argue over illuminators' role in documenting technology. Many treat them simply as artists, embellishing others' work. But in places like this abbey, where no separate engineering scribe existed, the illuminator became the record keeper. The archivist of the ephemeral. Morris hands you a half-finished page. I can't get the shading right on this one, he says. It's the feast clock from '93. The one that burned perfectly. You remember that design, Cedric still talks about it like it was a weather event. You sit beside Morris, and with his guidance, add gentle strokes of ochre and lavender to the flame. You don't speak. You just draw. When dawn begins to lighten the sky, you help him extinguish his candle and tidy the space. He slips back into the shadows, promising to teach you the scroll of fragrant errors the next time. You return to your cell, soot-smudged and grinning. After prime, you gather with the others in the cloister walk. Brother Oswin reports a mild frost. Might delay the new spiral, he says. But the survivors look strong. You and Aldrich spend the morning testing the updated twin-wick roots. These were carved to handle the faster-burning conditions of early spring air. You light 3 at once. Each burns slightly differently, but all stay steady. Then comes the unexpected guest. A dusty traveler arrives around midday, a Benedictine from a neighboring abbey, carrying a satchel filled with scrolls, dried herbs, and something odd. A small, hollowed good. I hear you burn vegetables, he says, deadpan. You invite him in. He sets the gourd on the work table and explains his abbey uses calabash gourds for their vespers. Grown in warmer climes, they hollow easily and burn longer than turnips, though they tend to rattle when dry. Cedric is immediately skeptical. They're woody. That's not a clock, that's a maraca. Still, you all agree to test one. You prep it like a turnip, trim the stem, carve the cavity, insert a stiff flax wick. You use a slightly resinous wax mix to complement the gourd's natural scent. When you light it, it burns beautifully. Steady flame. No rattling. A faint aroma of nutmeg and wood polish. Everyone leans in. Aldrich hums. This could work for travel hours. Fewer turnip failures. Ronan mumbles, still think it looks smug. You add it to the wax log as good one, trial successful. Surprisingly cooperative. The visitor stays for supper, where he and Cedric debate the theology of vegetable combustion in hushed, scholarly tones. You sneak a small slice of fruit loaf and listen. That night at Carmpline, the good clock marks the hour. The monks chant softly. The flame glows like an ember tucked in the hollow of memory. Afterward, you slip back to your cell, where Morris has left you a gift, a small illustrated scrap tucked under your candle dish. It's your face, smiling, beside a turnip with a halo. He's signed it, the next illuminator, if the sheep allow it. You light your personal clock, a leftover from yesterday with a soft mint scent, then lie back. Time flickers. Wax pools. And in your dreams, the turnips smile back. You wake to cold. Not a little chill or a morning breeze, but that kind of deep, unapologetic cold that sneaks through stone and wool and decides your toes no longer need feeling. You sit up, breath puffing visibly in your cell, and peer out the narrow window. Snow. Not a dusting. A full, dignified, monastery-hushing snowfall, blanketing the courtyard, softening the edges of the garden, and burying the paths like someone pressed a white sheet over the entire world. Brother Aldrich's voice calls softly down the hallway, layer up. No vespers fire until we know what's wet. You wrap yourself in 2 robes and trudge out. In the cloister, everything is muffled. The usual sounds, scraping sandals, whispered greetings, the occasional cough, have vanished beneath the thick hush of winter. The garden spiral is invisible beneath a snowdrift. The workshop door is iced shut. The wax barrels are cold as tombs. And worst of all? The turnips are too frozen to burn. The one prepared for prime is hard as marble, its wax center stiff and unwilling. You try to press the wick with your thumbnail. It doesn't budge. Brother Cedric pokes it with a spoon and mutters, "Even time's gone brittle." The monks gather anyway. There's no flame to mark the hour. But they pray. Afterwards, you all convene in the refectory, too cold for outdoor work, too dark for detailed copying. So instead, the monks gather to talk. Low voices, wrapped hands, shared cloaks. Someone starts a tale about the winter without bells. It was decades ago, when the abbey's bell tower cracked during a storm, and the monks had to keep time by instinct alone. Meals were late. Vespers ran long. One monk shaved his beard at none, convinced it was bedtime. Time, Brother Ronan says, cupping a warm clay mug of watered cider, gets slippery in winter. You nod. Because it's true. Even the most reliable turnips don't like the cold. Wax congeals. Wicks crack. Roots freeze and split from the inside out. The very system you've relied on, carved, lit, scented, praised, is useless without warmth. So what now? Adapt. Aldrich calls for a return to shadow clocks. By midday, you and Brother Ludo are outside, shivering in the snow, setting up a tall brass rod in the middle of the cloister courtyard, an old sundial post, rarely used. Won't work much, Ludo says, pointing to the overcast sky. But tradition says we try. Instead of accurate hour marks, you carve vague notches into the snow with your boot. That'll do for terse. Oswin and Cedric begin prepping the wax pots indoors, trying to warm the congealed stores by placing them near the bread ovens. The kitchen smells of beeswax and rye. You stir gently, trying not to think about how long this thaw will take. Later, you help light the emergency tallow candles, stored in the cellar for just such times. They're shorter, more pungent, and lack the beauty of your crafted turnip clocks, but they burn warm and strong. Historians rarely mention the realities of seasonal timekeeping failure. But monastery ledgers tell the truth, marginalia about wax freezing, candles snapping in half, roots cracking on the hearth. One famous complaint in a Yorkshire abbey reads, "Tried to mark sext. Candle exploded. Kitchen monk wept. Return to bed." You get it now. By mid-afternoon, the snow has slowed, but the clouds haven't cleared. The workshop is still too cold for delicate carving. You instead spend time sketching by the fire, recording this moment. Snow clinging to the eaves. A pile of failed clocks set by the hearth. Cedric asleep with a half-frozen turnip in his lap. Vespers is called by voice, not by flame. Brother Aldrich walks the halls with a small hand bell, ringing 3 times at each cloister doorway. The monks assemble slowly, wrapped in layers, faces flushed from cold. The chapel is lit only by the tall, unscented candles, bare flames, flickering with the draught. You find yourself missing the smell of rosemary and wax. Of thyme and tallow. Of turnip and trust. After prayers, the monks gather again in the refectory, not to eat, but to share stories of winter past. One novice describes a year when the snow buried the herb beds until Lent. Another remembers a failed Vespers where they misjudged the time and sang while the bell rope froze mid-swing. Oswin offers one better, we once used to beat. Didn't burn. Didn't care. Laughter ripples softly. You decide to try something bold. Back in the cellar, you find an old basket of small roots, too soft to be full clocks, too firm to toss. You hollow one with a spoon, melt a pinch of wax near the hearth, and set a short wick into the center. Then, you place it beside your cell's candle. It's tiny. It burns crooked. But it burns. A small, stubborn flame, surrounded by the chill. You name it Brother Crispin the Brave. That night, during Compline, the monks sing more slowly. The cold makes their breaths visible in the candlelight. You can barely feel your fingertips, but your voice is strong. No turnip clock marks this hour. Only flame, song, and snow. Afterwards, you curl up in your cell with Brother Crispin still glowing softly on the shelf. His flame wobbles once, steadies, and continues. You smile. Time is cold now. But it keeps burning. When you wake, the snow has stopped, but winter hasn't given up. A sheet of frost coats the cloister stones, and a thin layer of ice lines the inside of your window. The candles have burned low. Brother Crispin the Brave, your tiny emergency clock from last night, has burned himself into a puddle of wax and mild legend. You give his scorched remains a respectful nudge into a ceramic bowl. He did his job. Down in the cloister, the monks walk carefully. Robes held high to avoid slush. No bells are ringing. No turnip clocks are lit. The abbey is in winter silence, an informal pause declared whenever the cold renders timekeeping unpredictable. It's during this pause that something remarkable happens. Travelers arrive. Not many, just 3 figures, bundled thickly in cloaks the color of ash and soot, their boots crusted with snow, their shoulders stiff from miles on the road. They're monks from the urban priory of St. Florian, a city abbey known more for its illuminated manuscripts and punctual bell tower than for any kind of root-based ritual. They come bearing scrolls, a basket of candied figs, and the kind of expressions that say, we're politely confused, but willing to learn. Brother Cedric greets them at the door, eyes them up and down, and says, you'll want thicker socks. The clocks are on strike. You're assigned to help host them. Their leader, Brother Timaeus, is tall, owlish, and smells faintly of scribe ink. He walks into your workshop, eyes the racks of half-prepped turnips, and says, so, these are not for soup. You smile. Not primarily. You explain the system, 1 root, 1 wick, 1 hour. The burn is monitored. The scent is chosen. The time is marked not by ticking or chiming, but by melting and glow. You watch his brow furrow, not dismissively, but thoughtfully. It's soft, he says finally. We're used to iron bells. Loud clocks. Tower gongs. You nod. This isn't loud time. This is gentle time. Later, you demonstrate. You carve a fresh turnip, well, as fresh as one can be in the middle of a frost-drenched month, and prepare a new wick blend, flax core wrapped in rose stem fiber. The wax is infused with pine and myrrh, meant to evoke clarity and patience. You light it on the refectory table. The visitors stare. The flame blooms. Slowly, the scent spreads, a quiet resinous breath, softening the edges of the cold room. Brother Timaeus leans in. It's peaceful. It's reliable, Brother Aldrich says. In its own way. During terce, the visitors join the monks in silent prayer. No bell rings. Instead, the flicker of 3 synchronized clocks lights the chapel, one good, one turnip, and one of your hybrid, candle-root models built during the worst of last week's freeze. They burn together, leaning in unison. Afterwards, over bowls of thin broth and rye crackers, Brother Timaeus says something surprising. We've always thought time must declare itself. Announce itself. March forward. He pauses. But here, time kneels. You're not sure whether that's beautiful or slightly unsettling, but you accept it. Over the next day and a half, the visiting monks join you in testing wax blends, experimenting with scented infusions, and even carving their first clocks. Brother Alaric, the youngest among them, accidentally hollows a turnip straight through the bottom. Wax pours onto the table. Cedric sighs. You laugh. Whole clocks are still clocks, Oswin says with a shrug. They just burn faster. An end in tragedy. By Vespers, the city monks are fully converted. Timaeus prepares one himself, dubbing it Urban Ember. It smells of ink, smoke, and faint citrus. It burns for exactly 57 minutes. Respectable. That night, the city monks sit near the spiral garden, still buried under crusted snow, and share stories of their own timing systems, sand glasses used for manuscript drying, censer swings for pacing sermons. Even a coffee drip hourglass used secretly in one friar's study, far from abbot eyes. You share your own tales. The feast clock. Brother Crispin. The sheep. Especially the sheep. They listen in rapt horror. Time, says Brother Timaeus, shaking his head, should not be edible. Everything is edible, you reply, if your teeth are confident enough. Laughter. Quiet. Cold air made warm with companionship. The next morning, before they depart, the city monks leave you a gift, a brass hour ring, a small, portable sundial used on city rooftops. It's not especially accurate out here in the countryside, but it gleams with purpose. You set it near the workshop window, aligned just so. It casts a short shadow. Later, Brother Aldrich joins you to light a standard Lord's clock. Plain wax. Simple wick. No embellishment. But it burns beautifully. You both watch the first curl of smoke drift upward. Sheep-free, he says. You nod. For now. And somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of bleating reminds you, peace is temporary. Time, though, time continues. By root. By flame. By shadow when you wake, the snow has stopped, but winter hasn't given up. A sheet of frost coats the cloister stones, and a thin layer of ice lines the inside of your window. The candles have burned low. Brother Crispin the Brave, your tiny emergency clock from last night, has burned himself into a puddle of wax and mild legend. You give his scorched remains a respectful nudge into a ceramic bowl. He did his job. Down in the cloister, the monks walk carefully. Robes held high to avoid slush. No bells are ringing. No turnip clocks are lit. The abbey is in winter silence, an informal pause declared whenever the cold renders timekeeping unpredictable. It's during this pause that something remarkable happens. Travelers arrive. Not many. Just 3 figures, bundled thickly in cloaks the color of ash and soot, their boots crusted with snow, their shoulders stiff from miles on the road. They're monks from the urban priory of St. Florian, a city abbey known more for its illuminated manuscripts and punctual bell tower than for any kind of root-based ritual. They come bearing scrolls, a basket of candied figs, and the kind of expressions that say, we're politely confused, but willing to learn. Brother Cedric greets them at the door, eyes them up and down, and says, you'll want thicker socks. The clocks are on strike. You're assigned to help host them. Their leader, Brother Timaeus, is tall, owlish, and smells faintly of scribe ink. He walks into your workshop, eyes the racks of half-prepped turnips, and says, "So, these are not for soup?" You smile. Not primarily. You explain the system: 1 root, 1 wick, 1 hour. The burn is monitored. The scent is chosen. The time is marked not by ticking or chiming, but by melting and glow. You watch his brow furrow, not dismissively, but thoughtfully. "It's soft," he says finally. "We're used to iron bells. Loud clocks. Tower gongs." You nod. "This isn't loud time. This is gentle time." Later, you demonstrate. You carve a fresh turnip, well, as fresh as one can be in the middle of a frost-drenched month, and prepare a new wick blend, flax core wrapped in rose stem fiber. The wax is infused with pine and myrrh, meant to evoke clarity and patience. You light it on the refectory table. The visitors stare. The flame blooms. Slowly, the scent spreads, a quiet resinous breath, softening the edges of the cold room. Brother Timaeus leans in. "It's peaceful. It's reliable," Brother Aldrich says. In its own way. During terce, the visitors join the monks in silent prayer. No bell rings. Instead, the flicker of 3 synchronized clocks lights the chapel, 1 good, 1 turnip, and 1 of your hybrid, candle-root models built during the worst of last week's freeze. They burn together, leaning in unison. Afterwards, over bowls of thin broth and rye crackers, Brother Timaeus says something surprising. "We've always thought time must declare itself. Announce itself. March forward." He pauses. But here, time kneels. You're not sure whether that's beautiful or slightly unsettling, but you accept it. Over the next day and a half, the visiting monks join you in testing wax blends, experimenting with scented infusions, and even carving their first clocks. Brother Alaric, the youngest among them, accidentally hollows a turnip straight through the bottom. Wax pours onto the table. Cedric sighs. You laugh. "Whole clocks are still clocks," Oswin says with a shrug. "They just burn faster. And end in tragedy." By Vespers, the city monks are fully converted. Timaeus prepares one himself, dubbing it Urban Ember. It smells of ink, smoke, and faint citrus. It burns for exactly 57 minutes. Respectable. That night, the city monks sit near the spiral garden, still buried under crusted snow, and share stories of their own timing systems, sand glasses used for manuscript drying, censer swings for pacing sermons. Even a coffee drip hourglass used secretly in one friar's study, far from abbot eyes. You share your own tales. The feast clock. Brother Crispin. The sheep. Especially the sheep. They listen in rapt horror. "Time," says Brother Timaeus, shaking his head, "should not be edible." "Everything is edible," you reply, "if your teeth are confident enough." Laughter. Quiet. Cold air made warm with companionship. The next morning, before they depart, the city monks leave you a gift, a brass hour ring, a small, portable sundial used on city rooftops. It's not especially accurate out here in the countryside, but it gleams with purpose. You set it near the workshop window, aligned just so. It casts a short shadow. Later, Brother Aldrich joins you to light a standard Lord's clock. Plain wax. Simple wick. No embellishment. But it burns beautifully. You both watch the first curl of smoke drift upward. "Sheep-free," he says. You nod. For now. And somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of bleating reminds you, peace is temporary. Time, though, time continues. By root. By flame. By shadow. The snow has finally begun to melt. Not in any grand, cinematic way. It's more of a quiet surrender, wet earth showing in streaks between the cloister stones, icicles weeping themselves into oblivion, and that soft squelch underfoot that says winter's giving up, but not going quietly. You step outside with Brother Oswin just after Lord's, breath clouding faintly, and look over the garden. The spiral is visible again. Misshapen, slightly trampled, and still dusted with snow, but there. shoots of green peek from the soil like cautious hands rising in prayer. The turnips, it seems, have survived. At least most of them. Nature keeps its own rhythm, Oswin murmurs, tucking his hands into his sleeves. We just try to hum along. Back in the workshop, the wax flows again. The barrels, long stiff with cold, have begun to loosen. You skim off the top frost layer, revealing soft, golden wax beneath. The smell returns, the gentle sweetness of beeswax, the grounding heft of tallow. Brother Cedric is already carving a fresh set of roots. He's got a new idea, a layered burn clock. Multiple chambers in a single turnip, each filled with a different wax blend. First chamber for matins, he says. Second melts into lords. Time stacked like a cake. It's ambitious. Slightly mad. Exactly his style. You help hollow the root, a wider specimen from the protected cellar stock. You carve 2 wax basins inside, each with its own wick, but carefully separated. The wax blends are different colors, one pale, one a deeper amber. Once lit, the idea is that the first chamber will burn cleanly, and as it finishes, heat will melt through a thin inner wall to ignite the second. If it works, Cedric says, we may need a bell system just to celebrate. You light it just after terce. The first chamber burns like a dream, steady, floral, faintly citrus-scented. You wait. At the 45-minute mark, a small pop. Then a tiny blue flame bursts to life in the second chamber. You and Cedric freeze. Then grin. It works, you whisper. It lives, he adds, dramatically. You record the result in the wax journal, layered turnip clock, 2-fold flame. Chamber method viable. Unclear if more layers safe. Do not attempt third layer until further notice. The abbey is still humming from the recent visit of the city monks. A few have written letters. One enclosed a drawing of a clock gourd wearing spectacles, titled Saint Centus of the Flame. Brother Ludo now wants to include it in the Liber Temper Rum. History is what we say it is, he argues. Not if it's got a monocle, mutters Aldrich. Despite the playful mood, something shifts that afternoon. During Vespers, Brother Alban doesn't show. Alban, the quiet monk who tended the bell rope for nearly 30 years. Who always brought the turnip clocks from the prep shelf to the altar. Who never raised his voice, but somehow commanded reverence just by folding his hands. He's not at prayers. Not in the scriptorium. Not in the garden. Not even in the refectory, where he usually sneaks an extra scoop of lentils. You help Aldrich check his cell. The door is ajar. The candle inside has burned down to a puddle. The wax is lavender. Familiar. On his bench, a folded robe. A prayer cord. A small parchment. My time is kept. Let the wick burn in my stead. There's no alarm. No frantic search. Just a quiet nod among the older monks. A bell is tolled, not in mourning, but in rhythm. Brother Alban has passed. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Just gently. As if his internal clock finally reached its last wax groove and dimmed on cue. You're asked to prepare the Carmpline clock in his honor. You choose a medium root. Not fancy. Not large. A good, reliable turnip. One that burns true. You blend a wax of beeswax and sage, with a bit of cedar ash, symbolic of memory, quiet, return. You carve the wick channels in the shape of a cross, just faint enough to guide the flow. The flame is lit. It burns steadily throughout Carmpline. No flicker. No sputter. The scent is grounding, earthy, familiar. The monks chant. Heads bowed. You keep your eyes on the clock. It holds. Later, you return to the workshop and retrieve one of Alban's old turnips from the display shelf. A failed model, once used in a humidity experiment. Its top is scorched. Its sides are cracked. But someone had carved a tiny smiley face near the base. You hold it for a long moment. you set it beside your own bench. That night, you light a personal clock, lavender wax, in quiet homage. The flame flickers once, then stills. You lie down, and in the hush of your cell, you remember the way Alban always nodded once when a flame burned clean, as if acknowledging time itself. Your turnip candle burns a little longer than expected. You let it, because some clocks deserve a few extra minutes. The days are growing longer. You notice it first not in the sky, but in the clocks. A small, quiet shift, wax that melts a touch faster, turnip walls that dry more quickly on the racks, flames that flicker a little taller in the afternoon light. Spring, like time, doesn't knock, it simply shows up and expects you to catch up. You're outside with Brother Oswin in the spiral garden when he gestures to the sun and says, "We'll have to adjust the wick lengths." She's climbing earlier. And he's right. What once burned perfectly from Lords to Terce now overshoots by 7 or 8 minutes, just enough to throw off a chant or two and earn a disapproving glance from Cedric. You and Aldrich return to the wax table, recalibrating the formula: thinner wicks, denser wax. More rosemary. Less bay. In the background, Brother Ludo updates the Liber Temper rum with fresh diagrams, sun angles, shadow lengths, even a cheeky sketch of a turnip sweating under a too-hot flame. You've spent months now in this rhythm, carving roots, blending wax, adjusting flames. What once felt novel now feels like second nature. You know which turnips crack too easily, which wicks curl, which waxes pull in lazy spirals. You even start to predict which monk will show up late to none based on the scent of the clock. Time has become more than a system. It's become familiar. Today, Brother Cedric calls you into the workshop alone. He's standing beside the long cedar shelf where the clocks are prepared. A fresh row of roots glistens in the morning light. He hands you a knife. You're ready. You blink. For what? He gestures to the central root. To make the anchor clock. You've heard of it, whispered like legend. The anchor clock is the centerpiece of the Abbey's equinox celebration. Lit at dawn, it burns all the way until dusk, a full-day flame, steady and unbroken. No substitutions. No resets. You've never made one. He walks you through the design: a large turnip, hollowed precisely, its base lined with a mix of beeswax, hardened lard, and, secretly, crushed oak ash. The wick is reinforced, braided linen, dipped and dried in sun-warmed wax. You begin. You shave. You carve. You mix. You measure. You steady your hands and your breath. The room falls silent except for the soft scrape of knife on root. When you finish, Cedric doesn't say anything. He just nods and sets the clock in the place of honor near the chapel altar. Dawn, he says. You light it. You don't sleep that night. Not because you're nervous, you are, but because the monks have gathered for an all-night vigil, an ancient custom to welcome the changing season. They chant in shifts. Some read psalms. Others doze, heads bowed, candles flickering. You sit near the anchor clock, staring at its unlit wick. It looks calm. You, not so much. At first light, the abbot steps forward, robes freshly brushed, face unreadable, and motions to you. You strike the taper. You touch it to the wick. The anchor clock takes flame. It starts small. All clocks do. But within moments, the wick glows strong, the wax pulls evenly, and the turnip emits its chosen scent at the blend of sage, orange rind, and oak ash. A grounding scent. A scent that says, begin. The monks chant. The day passes. You watch the flame. Hour by hour. It survives terce. Holds through sext. Wavers briefly after none, but steadies. You adjust the altar dish. Not much. Just enough. Brother Oswin slips you a barley biscuit. You're not a monk until you've stared at a root for 8 hours straight. Evening creeps in. The sun dips low. The chapel windows burn gold. The chant rises for vespers. And then? The flame fades. Flickers. Extinguishes. Exactly on time. You exhale. The anchor clock is whole. The burn was perfect. Later that night, you help carry the cooled shell to the chapel alcove of kept hours, a narrow shelf holding the remains of previous anchor clocks. You place yours beside them, one among many. But uniquely yours. Then you do something unexpected. You carve your initials into the base. Small. Discreet. But permanent. After Carmpline, the abbey falls silent. The air smells faintly of wax and orange rind. The clocks are dark. Time, for now, is unlit. You return to your cell, light one final personal clock, cedar-scented, short wick, warm glow, and lie back on your bench. The flame dances. The room glows. The abbey sleeps. And you, for the first time, feel fully part of its quiet rhythm. The clock you lit beside your bed flickers lower now, casting long shadows across the stone wall. Its scent, soft and woody, curls around you like a familiar blanket. Outside, the wind barely stirs. Even the sheep are still. You close your eyes and imagine the spiral garden beneath the stars, its green shoots reaching upward, its soil cool and calm. Somewhere in the dark, the wax roots are resting, gathering strength. Time, buried deep, waiting to bloom again. The workshop is quiet. Tools cleaned and stacked. The turnips lined up in their cloth slings, each one a promise, a quiet oath to burn true. Even the Liber Tempo rum lies open on the desk, its pages still, ink drying on a sketch of the anchor clock you made with such care. The flame you lit has finished its story. Its melted wax rests in a shallow curve, like a gentle smile. You shift slightly under your blanket, breath slowing. The room is warm. The silence is kind. There's no hurry here. No ticking. No bells. Only the sense that time is holding its breath beside you, keeping pace, flickering softly until you no longer need it. Let the wick burn a little longer. Let the hours pool into stillness. And when sleep comes, as it must, let it carry you gently, like the scent of lavender wax rising on warm air. Sweet dreams.